This is what Frank Peretti's background, like, because he does his own like background voices and sound effects and stuff in the audiobook. And so,
my God.
When it's like he walked in and the place was full of scary demons, and in the background you hear so good. It's so terrible.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast that does all the voices and the sound effects. I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
Oh no, a banana peel. What?
And joining us today is Scott Benson, the man behind video games.
The whole thing.
The guy who made video games, who invented them.
Yeah.
Astral photographer, illustrator. You know him, of course, for Night in the Woods.
Scott is joining us to talk about This Present Darkness, the 1988, I want to say?
86, but it
Yeah,
didn't really
it's
start
earlier than
selling
you
until
think.
88.
Yeah.
Okay, so 1986 to 88 novel by Frank Peretti. If you're a longtime listener of our show, you might remember that a very long time ago, we reviewed the movie of Hangman's Curse, the young adult novel by Frank Peretti.
And I was planning mostly, because there have been a few movie adaptations of Frank Peretti, I was planning on mostly sticking to that. But the thing is, This Present Darkness is the Frank Peretti book.
Yes.
It's the thing that you really have to talk about over
Yeah.
all of the other novels.
Yeah, I think that like this one, its sequel, and then maybe the Cooper Kids books were also like those were like the biggest of his This Present Darkness stuff, I think. Although, to be fair, I did not follow him into some of his 2000s stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the most.
You didn't miss much.
This Present Darkness was certainly the biggest.
Yeah.
After those two, I think probably the biggest seller was The Oath. So he's had sort of diminishing sales ever since. Although I think he actually improved greatly as a writer, which is not to say that he ever was good. Just that he got so much better than what we read here.
In order to understand This Present Darkness and where it came from and what its deal is, I think we first need to dig into the context around the creation and publication of this book. And I think, Brian, you've got some stuff, right?
Yeah, so Frank Peretti, he was born in 1951. He's a boomer. He's a true boomer. He was born in Canada, but
after reading this? No way. He's a zoomer for sure.
It is rare to read a book that is more of its time than this book. Like this hyper specific things, we'll get into it later, that get said. Like it is as if it was heard in snippets in a panic. This is what's going on out in the world, kind of thing. And so some of the stuff that the daughter comes out with, it's like, yeah, no one after 1987 was worried about that phrase,
Right.
or something. It's like if someone says like, cultural Marxism, or if someone says like secular humanism, like the Christians aren't freaking out over secular humanism in that sense anymore. So you can spot it based on the panic term for gay communism.
So Frank Peretti was born in Canada, but he grew up in Seattle. His dad was an Assemblies of God minister, and he eventually followed in his father's footsteps. But first, he ended up becoming part of a Christian bluegrass group called Northern Cross.
You can still find it on YouTube. I watched it for Northern Cross performance.
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
Yeah, where he reunited with them. He plays the banjo. Yeah. Learned how to play the banjo after graduating high school.
Are they good?
Yeah, they're fine.
For what they are, I don't know how much you love a Gaither family homecoming.
Yeah.
I love it, but
talk to a real Gaither head over here.
Yeah, it's less funeral home dirge of because Gaither homecomings are kind of like the Cracker Barrel afterlife or something.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Everyone has heart attacks at the Cracker Barrel, or because they are like upset at the games out in the little game spot or something, and they're very upset about it. And then that's where you go if you die in the Cracker Barrel, is just to an eternal Gaither homecoming.
The problem with them is they don't have a Mark Lowry to like balance them out.
Oh, sure.
Like Frank Peretti is their Mark Lowry. That's no good.
And that's a problem. That's a real problem.
Well, this is funny because and I'm sure we'll get into it, but Frank Peretti, a bit of a cut up, guys.
Oh yeah,
a bit of a cut up. Yeah,
he loves kids. He loves making like kids entertainment. He has a whole series of like videos where he's like an eccentric professor who teaches kids Bible shit. And he went from this Northern Cross band into starting sort of a music worship ministry thing for a little bit. Then he went to UCLA, where he studied English and film and didn't graduate, or it sounds like he didn't graduate at least. And after UCLA, he went back home and tried to work with his dad at their church as like an assistant minister and, you know, get more involved in the ministry himself. Something happens in 1983 and he gets out of the ministry. Right. And you can see that in the foreword to This Present Darkness. He calls himself like a burned out former pastor now working at a ski factory. And that's what he was doing. He was taking odd jobs, doing construction work, working at a ski factory.
And he's never really spoken to what specifically that thing is based on what you can find.
Demonic false accusations.
Yeah, that's the thing is I think if you read multiple books of his, you'll start to see a recurring theme in what happens to specific pastors, some of whom are narrated in the first person.
And it's just wild to me that LA was such a hub for like all these like evangelical.
It still is.
Yeah,
honestly.
Yeah, Southern California is really, really conservative, like in like that kind of very white panic way.
Hi, I grew up in San Diego, Scott. You don't got to tell me.
You didn't have to grow up with all this same stuff. Like you were in the different kind of Christianity.
I was in the Catholic kind of Christianity.
Oh, you were in the false Christianity.
False God.
You were false worship for me.
Yeah.
So something happened there in 1983, and while he was doing all this odd job work, he really wanted to be a writer. He had studied writing and everything, and he was writing stuff out on like scratch paper, like used up typewriter paper. He'd flip it around and type something new on it for a book. He got a children's book published, and then he got this manuscript that he was shopping around to 14 different publishers, and then finally someone bit. Crossway Publishing. And this is what ended up becoming This Present Darkness. So Crossway Books is an offshoot of something called Good News Publishers.
To me, it's more like Bad News Publishers.
That's right, Josh. That's right.
These names are so incredibly on the nose that like literally this sounds like Peretti's writing or something. It's like he worked at a ministry called Crossway, and she worked at an evil feminist place called Feminazi Groceries. Vegans or something. Yeah.
Now I understand why no editor was like, "Hey, this sounds a little too on the nose." It's because it was
too subtle.
Publishing.
Yeah. I don't think any editor touched that. He rebuked them. I'm sure.
I think it was just Frank and his wife.
There was nothing left out of this book. I don't think.
It's like a Robert Galbraith book, except not as bad. But
they both got their start writing on napkins.
Yeah, Good News also got its start writing on napkins. In 1938, they started out publishing tracts. So little, AJ, if you ever walked into a Protestant church, there are these little pieces of paper.
No, I would burst into flames.
Yeah. That would be like, hey, leave the Pope and join the real Christians. That's what they published. And they got really big during World War II. I don't know if they got big defense contracts or what, but they put out millions of these things to the point where Crossway Publishing now still distributes about 23 million tracts a year.
Wow.
In 1979, they started the book side of their publication enterprise, and that was very common. Christian fiction publishing didn't really kick off until the mid-late 70s. Even Christian nonfiction publishing outside of like academic circles didn't really kick off until the 70s. Crossway also put out the ESV Bible, because everyone's got to have their own translation.
That's how you make money.
Wait, what does that one stand for?
English Standard?
English Standard version. It's supposed to be the most literal translation.
How did I know that? I feel like I was possessed by a higher spirit.
Say yes to the Lord. He's knocking. But no,
he's waving through my window.
I had forgotten about, because I remember like back in like church and in the schools I went to, there was this sort of hierarchy of what was like the good translations.
Yeah.
There's like KJV and NIV. Obviously, there was New American Standard. That one I remember there was some controversy over, and I do not remember why. It might have been less literal or something
like that. Yeah, and then we had like Good News for Modern Man and the Living Bible, which were less literal.
The Living Bible, yeah.
Also from the 70s.
I remember I had Good News for Modern Man, because that was the one that was like slightly more casual, wasn't it?
Yeah. It used a lot of like contractions, like don't and can't.
Yeah.
See, in West Michigan, we are exclusive NIV people. We're real Niv heads.
Wow.
And that, of course, is because of the fact that it's published by Zondervan, which is right there in Grand Rapids.
Right.
I want to get back to the Living Bible. Is this a thing where you open it and it just started screaming at you?
Yeah, it's a Necronomicon edition. It's bound in human flesh and it has the voice. Yeah.
I see you're reading numbers again.
I mean, the thing is, if you asked Frank Peretti, he would say that unironically. And so Crossway also published like Francis Schaeffer, the boy himself, John Piper, Max Lucado, Joni Eareckson Tada, that shit,
We're just, this is a fucking murderer's row.
The hits keep coming, I'm saying.
It's just like Francis Schaeffer and John fucking Piper back to back. That is a cursed bunch of syllables right there. I
just love too that like AJ just has to sit there and be like,
he has no idea what's coming.
Squish, Schiffer, Piper, Lipschitz.
You have to have hit Francis Schaeffer on this podcast before, right?
We've talked about him a little bit, but there will be one day where we really dig into it.
Yeah.
We might grab you for that again.
Please watch if we do one of his miniseries, if we do his films. Escape from Reason and shit. Oh my God. It's terrible, but just Francis Schaeffer is such a weird character. He looks, everyone Google a picture of Francis Schaeffer. Don't read anything else about him. Just Google a picture of this man.
I'm doing it right now.
Because it sounds like if you just describe it, you're like, oh, they lived on this sort of intentional community in Switzerland. Yeah. He kind of dressed like kind of weird. And you're like, oh, okay, well, he must have had some interesting theology. No.
He also doesn't have a full goatee. He just has a chin bush. And then nothing around it.
I don't like that word, AJ.
Chin bush? Yeah. Well, we'll get to Hank Bush in a little bit.
That's true. Yeah. So, finishing this up, tying this off, Crossway Publishing took a risk on Frank Peretti's work because at this point, Christian fiction publishing, which was only about 10 years old, was just like romance books or like, Hallmark Hall of Fame kind of stuff.
Jack Chick aside, because Jack Chick was in the game at this point.
And Chick was doing his tracts, of course, and he's a purely independent Pentecostal, just like Frank Peretti is a Pentecostal. So to do something that's kind of a horror story, although I was surprised at how not a horror story this was. Something that has demons, something that has ugliness, something that has many references to cussing in it.
Yeah, they don't cuss, but they sure mention that cussing happened.
Yeah, so great. Like, he's such a crumb. And I'm like, a fucking crumb?
In a pig's eye, he is.
Oh, in a pig's eye.
This story feels like he started writing it in the 70s in a lot of ways. Like, this feels a lot like sort of the film distribution system of like the Thief in the Night movies, but applied to books for the first time. And it has a lot. I mean, even in his foreword to the book, he talks about stuff like how concerned he was that Star Wars had come out and made everything really new agey.
Yeah.
Sure. The Force, all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he saw this as like the drug tripping of the 60s leading to the yoga movements of the 1970s into the Satan worship of the 80s that was definitely going on.
Yes.
So this published in 86, same year as the Challenger disaster.
The two are not related, but
that's what you say that. But those O-rings were made by the FLDS in Southern Utah. I'm not even joking.
Jesus.
Okay.
Wow.
It barely sold. It sold about 4,200 in a year, which I guess is not like horrible.
I mean, by modern standards, that's very, very good. But
that's not like money you can live off of for sure.
Yeah. Also at the time, like, I don't know how much of a market there was. Like, I feel like This Present Darkness really helped create that market.
Absolutely.
And, it was not the first thing to do and talk about the things that it does, but it was the big one. Yeah. It was the before and after moment.
Well, because also parallel to literature, also music was coming up, contemporary Christian music. And so you have these parallel ecosystems of content so that you can buy that rather than the secular stuff, all available in parallel outlets as well, so that you can go to a family Christian stores rather than a Borders or something like that.
And this is where the key really is, because Amy Grant, who was one of the late additions to the Jesus music scene when she was 16 years old, is now a pretty big star with some crossover success in the 80s. And so a year or two-ish after This Present Darkness is published, she reads it. Some friend gives it to her, and she's going through a lot of shit at that point in time. And I guess it resonated with her because on her concert tour, she would talk about reading the book on stage to the crowds of fans coming and seeing it.
Holy
and so
shit.
all of a sudden, this book exploded. And for a while, Frank Peretti had no idea why. Because he'd just occasionally call every couple of weeks and be like, how many sold? And they'd be like 12. And then it would be like, oh, so this week it was 2,000 for some reason.
Whoa. Amy Grant, for those of you who are not totally in the know on contemporary Christian music, if you remember her for anything, it's probably for her single Baby Baby.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you're within the Christian sphere, you might remember her for other songs such as El Shaddai.
Parallel to that was Michael W. Smith, around the same time in the late 80s, had on his Eye to Eye record that my family listened to, there's an instrumental track called Ashton, which is supposedly it's his soundtrack for this book, essentially.
It's like an instrumental suite based on this novel, and you can find a whole lot of interpretive danced skits from various churches and youth groups and Christian high schools,
many
all
of which
over the
are
country.
Assemblies of God.
They're so good.
Well, as soon as you said AOG at the beginning of this, I was like, oh, jeez. Anyway.
It's just wild to me that anyone could read this book and be like, I am inspired to make art. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I read this book and it drains the life from me. Like, there was some sort of Frank Peretti-shaped demon crouched on my head, just slowly sucking the life out of me.
His talons in your brown. If he's mentioned they have talons and yellow eyes, but they have yellow eyes. He says yellow eyes like about 9,000 times.
Oh no, I didn't clock that.
But I was that kid though. I read it when I was like 11, and I was totally, completely like mad into this and stuff. So like I was totally drawing that kind of stuff. We can get to that in a bit, but it filled a niche. Christian culture of that time. It was not necessarily about quality. It was about did you fill the niche while doing the shout outs to the right thing?
Right.
Essentially.
You can now you have your own Stephen King book, but it's got Jesus in it.
Yeah. And it sucks ass.
So by September of 1989, there's this LA Times article that talks about Amy Grant and all this stuff. By September of 1989, Piercing the Darkness has now been out for a month. This Present Darkness has sold over 700,000 copies, and Piercing the Darkness, in the span of just that 1 month, has sold almost an equal number of copies.
Wow.
So Frank Peretti's doing just fine.
The town in Piercing the Darkness is called Bacon's Corner.
Yeah.
Do you like that, AJ? Seems like you're smiling a little bit.
Yeah. It's a town full of Redditors.
Yes. The prince of this epic place. Yeah.
So
I upvote you, Tal.
So this went from languishing on like the back shelves of Christian booksellers to the front shelves of like Walden Books and B. Dalton's all over the country.
It had an absolutely great cover. Still, that cover's great.
Yeah, it's
still
so good.
super, super good. Yeah, that was why I wanted to read it as a kid, because I was like, "What is this? This looks
it's about
rad."
a big bird.
Yeah,
yeah. Is it the wing one or is it the one with the talons coming down?
It's the talons coming
It's
down.
the talons
Of course,
one?
it's the talons.
It's like
just
a
needs yellow eyes.
silhouette of like I think like a church on like a hill or something. It's just fairly like silhouetted, and then there's kind of, it's like very watercolor, but then these sort of
the colors are
silhouetted,
beautiful.
There's sort of silhouetted talons coming down to grasp the church, and it's the best part of this whole thing. Is the cover of that book.
It really fucks.
Yeah, it's great.
So Jan Dennis of the publisher was quoted in the LA Times in that article, and he said, "There are 35 or 40 million people in this country who are really upset with the way things are. And for once, their side is not beaten down.
Oh, praise the Lord.
They win."
Wow.
But to say that in 1989,
Reagan's America?
Yeah.
Not even Reagan's.
Oh, it's Bush
H.W.
now.
Bush's America.
right.
Yeah.
So this marks a huge shift for Christian fiction. We get more genres. We get more horror. We get people like Ted Dekker coming in, or the book Shadowmancer much later on. We get the Left Behind series, which is like an international espionage thriller, which This Present Darkness also is.
And it's a direct, the guy who, LaHaye, I think, what was like, This Present Darkness was the thing that kicked open the door for us. Like, Left Behind guys, like, specifically are like, this is 100% the doing of Frank Peretti.
One thing that's great about This Present Darkness is that it has two great male leads, both of whom never jack off or cheat.
Nope.
Yeah, despite the accusations, they are
many accusations.
They're both they are strong and upright in the Lord. Yeah.
Are you telling me that Marshall is not jacking it in that office every chance he gets? He loves that newspaper so fucking hard. Come on.
There are moments in this where Frank's need to, toe the line on, Frank's desire to toe the line on sort of the moral uprightness of these characters really fights it, because Marshall and Brenda really should have ended up together. Bernice, sorry, yeah. Fucking Brenda, Bernice, whatever.
We're going to make a soup out of all of these names. Yeah. They call her Bernie like twice at the beginning, and then don't call her Bernie again.
Isn't there another Bernie, though? Like, isn't there like one of the tertiary
Bernie Sanders, the longtime senator from Vermont.
He's the main villain.
Yeah, he's the one who's coming to town. They're like, he's rootless and cosmopolitan. He's just wandering around into our communities.
Which, by the way, I think happy birthday, Bernie. I believe that today is his birthday.
It's also the death of the Queen, so that's what's
happy
up.
death day to the Queen.
Oh, yeah. We're recording this on the day that Queen Elizabeth ate shit and died.
Yeah, that's another win.
She was trying to do an ollie, a sick trick on her skateboard, and she biffed it so hard she exploded.
That's another win for our prayer warriors against the demonic forces of Anglicanism.
That's right.
So I made the joke about like Sanders showing up here in sort of like a in a kind of stereotypical like anti-Semitic way that you would imagine for here, but I bring that up because this book was less anti-Semitic specifically than I expected it to be.
Yeah,
it had to make room for so many other racisms.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, it's much more because of what it's going after. It is much more of like this is like the Far East.
There's a lot more of like Hindu stuff than I was expecting
because of the New Age aspect of it. But like they, I was shocked that like there wasn't like, and then like Steve Rosenberg showed up or something like that. It just didn't happen. I was actually really shocked. I was like, good on you, Peretti. You weren't super anti-Semitic. That's the one thing you didn't do in this book.
Is that in Piercing the Darkness? Does he like follow up? He's like, oops, I forgot, and then put it all in one book.
I feel like because Piercing the Darkness has more to do with like the ACLU and stuff like that. So I think there's far more
it's about
anti-Semitic stuff.
Yeah, it's about political correctness and ACLU and government control coming after Christian schools, basically.
Right.
It's that
hell
kind of thing.
Whose children are they?
That's what I'm saying.
We're all Frank's children.
This present darkness begins on a summer's eve in Ashton. Ashton what? It never says. I think it's supposed to be like New Hampshire or something.
It's within the area because they're not far from New York.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, we start with this summer festival, and it's the annual festival. Wow.
It's the carnival.
Yeah.
When all of the Roma and the strange, like, rootless criminals come in.
That's what
It is a festival of every sin imaginable. Like, Frank starts this off like, I think this is the beginning of Frank's problem with making lists in this book, where he's he used the word prostitutes like 50,000 times in this book.
Yes.
And at the beginning, he's just like, it's like the carnival. And like, there was like, everyone was like eating hot dogs and there were 9,000 prostitutes and stuff. And then like every kind of sin you can imagine was happening in the street. And also there was a dunk booth. And it's like,
I have a quote here from this opening section, which I think gets right at that list thing you're talking about, Scott. It was a wild time, a chance to get drunk, pregnant, beat up, ripped off, and sick all in the same night.
Okay, that sounds pretty great. That's not like any carnival I have ever been to.
This is a small town where everyone in the book is always lamenting how till like yesterday or last year, it was the most wholesome Mayberry ass. It's the town from Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
Except for every now and again, once a year, they have a fucking purge or something. It's just like godless bacchanal.
This is a college town of 14,000 people, and apparently 200 of them are hookers.
Literally. It's like later on,
like streetwalkers.
Listen, it's a very progressive town. They license their sex workers.
They're very sex worker affirming. Like literally, at one point, like Peretti says, she was in the pen with all the prostitutes that had been trucked in for the carnival. And I'm like, what is this carnival? Where people are like, you know what, here's the thing. We've got some sex workers in this tiny town. We need more. Send out the call.
Yeah.
One thing that's going on is that there's a woman, Bernice, the roving photographer for the newspaper.
Yeah.
She's taking pictures.
Yeah, she takes some pictures of some guys at the the subliminal suggestion of a couple of angels, a couple of really hot dudes.
Yeah, there's
shown up.
There's these guys walking around, and they're not just men, folks. They're angels.
They're beefcakes.
They are tall men in work clothes.
Yes.
That's how you know that they're trustworthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're
big
like literally like
swords.
7 foot tall and like just massively built, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're Kelvin gemstones like entourage.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of them is actually named Tal as well, just to
Tal.
be very clear here.
TAL.
That's what he
TAL,
is.
because he's tall.
Yeah.
So we've got that on the one side. We've got
I can't
angels.
believe I didn't put that together. That's so fucking
and-
stupid.
Here's another indication that I had that Frank Peretti started writing this in the 70s because he mentions 2 gas stations at war. And the gas station wars were not still going on in 1986.
sure.
This is the worst opening to an episode of Supernatural ever.
Yeah. It's
I love it because it
so-
resolves at the end.
Yeah.
It's like, and then some prayer happened and we were all good. And this book always does that.
Basically, the rules of this world are that the people are just there. They're existing in the corporeal world. And then there's this second plane that the people can't see. And on that plane, there are angels who are encouraging the people to do good things.
Yep.
And there are demons who are encouraging the people to do bad things. And sometimes the angels get in fights with the demons, as in this example.
The wings hummed in a blur as it banked sharply in a flying turn and headed for the door again. Red vapors chugging in dashes and streaks from its nostrils. Its talons bared and poised for attack, a ghostly siren of a scream rising in its throat. Like an arrow through a target, like a bullet through a board, it streaked through the door and instantly felt its insides tearing loose.
Oh, shit.
Oh,
There was an explosion.
Some Garth Marenghi shit here. This is so good.
I should read it in that voice.
Insides tearing loose.
There was an explosion of suffocating vapor, one final scream, and the flailing of withering arms and legs. Then there was nothing at all except the ebbing stench of sulfur and the 2 strangers suddenly inside the church.
I'll do this as Matt Berry coming up. Go ahead.
The big blonde man replaced a shining sword as the white light that surrounded him faded away.
A spirit of harassment?
He asked,
Or doubt. Or fear. Who knows?
This is about on the level. Actually, I think this is better than Frank's narration of this. Although Frank skips this entire scene. At the beginning.
Smart choice.
He yada 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 is up until like the 3rd or 4th chapter. Basically.
But yeah,
because he knows he doesn't have a
Yeah.
strong opening. What you want to
Right.
do with the strong opening is just let the danger of the demon be there, and that's it.
Absolutely. Like that, the carnival is one of the worst openings to anything that's supposed to be suspenseful I have ever seen in my, because it's like 2 angels walked up and then nothing happened really.
Yeah.
And like there's no menace. Well, because you're supposed to read the menace from the fact of like everyone's getting the most fucked up anyone has ever gotten.
People are
in
drinking
town.
beer.
People are drinking beer.
They are drinking 2 beers.
Wow. They're getting pregnant. They're having multiple abortions per night, but in a gay way. And shit. Like that's like just his description of this horrible bacchanal. So I think you're supposed to go, oh no, the moral depravity of this place.
Yeah.
That's what hooks me. Like now I need to see like what happens or
Well, because
something.
also, I mean, you've got to think about this from the eyes of the intended audience.
Right.
These are people who would be scandalized by the suggestion of this impropriety.
I mean, the fact that Frank Peretti even says the word hooker, much less multiple times, is itself very scandalous.
Yeah, he didn't just write like H-KER or something. Yeah.
So after the carnival, we meet basically our 2 main leads. These again are our 2 wonderful, morally upright men. We've got Hank Bush, who is the good minister, right? He's
the good young Pentecostal pastor at a small church who might be getting run out by his congregation.
Who's 26 years
For no
old.
reason. For no reason.
And
he simply is a dick about stuff because that's what the Lord says. And until the Lord changes his mind, this is where Hank is.
He's not changing his.
And I've got a quote from that we're going to read later on.
Oh boy!
And then so Hank is really going to be the protagonist who is dealing on the spiritual side of this battle.
Yeah, he's the prayer warrior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we've got Marshall Hogan. He is the small town newspaper editor with big city experience.
Yes.
Yeah. He was on the New York Times.
Yes.
And
Worked for the Gray Lady.
In 1920s slang the
He
whole
sure
time.
does.
Marshall has considerably more to do than Hank.
Oh, yes.
Considerably more of the plot is Marshall focused. As evidenced again by the abridged part, Hank disappears from the narrative of the abridged version until like the last hour of a 3-hour thing. He doesn't show up until right before the big sort of climax gets going. He's just gone.
It's also worth noting that we have angels and demons as main characters as well.
Yeah.
And they have even less to do.
They have no personality.
And there's like 90,000 of them.
And they do almost nothing.
Yeah. It's amazing.
They stand there glowering. It's a fucking Dragon Ball Z thing. The whole thing. We're going to fight. Oh my God, last time we fought, it was a big deal. Oh, I haven't seen this power level since blah, blah. Like literally the angels and demons are sitting there doing that at each other.
They are much like the Dragon Balls insofar as they are inert.
And also you can't really figure out the physics of what counts as harm in their fights or something where I'm like, what does dying mean to you people? Like, what is like the rule set of this world hits a lot of the same problems that the rule set of this sort of outlook, this sort of theology does, which is the interplay between agencies of like, well, there's angels, demons, gods, Satan, and then there's people. And then prayer is this sort of general energy force kind of thing.
Prayer
We'll get to that, but
That strengthens the angel's power.
It's a stat boost,
Yeah. I thought it was really weird, that scene where Tal was just being force-fed a lot of things, and he kept saying, oh no, I can't eat another bite. But then they were like, no, you can eat another bite.
Yeah,
and then
he gets
ate
so
another bite.
full. He gets so
he just
full
gets
and round.
So full.
Like perfectly, just like Goku does.
Yes, just like Goku
don't
does.
pray for me anymore. I'll be too full of spirit. I'll be too full of spirit of
This
the
whole
Lord.
thing really is just like 2 spirit bombs at the same time. It's the demons have a spirit bomb and the angels have a spirit bomb,
the way
and we're
that
just waiting.
All just talking, by the way, I am like wondering. I'm like, if there have been like awful fandom shipping wars in this book,
there are a lot of thirsty fan arts, is what I'm seeing off of this Google.
Getting canceled for shipping Tall and Rafar.
Rafar,
That was a big problem on Usenet.
It's over in alt.fiction.Peretti.
Oh God. I have a logistical question. Why Frank E. Peretti and not Frank Peretti? Why did you drop the E because it was cleaner?
Got added on later on because there is another famous Frank Peretti who is notable because of the Satanic Panic, because he is the medical examiner in the state of Arkansas who handled the West Memphis 3 case.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Same name.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's why Frank started adding the E to his name.
I have read about West Memphis 3 and like watched a bunch of stuff on it. I somehow never, ever, I do not remember learning that at all. That's an insane
That's wild.
There's just another Frank Peretti out there who's also got some of the same bugs in his brain.
Yeah.
One last thing that I wanted to note about the way that Frank Peretti writes his good guys and bad guys. The good guys are always referred to by their first name, and the bad guys are always referred to by their last name. Always.
Oh, yeah.
Always.
With the one exception of that weed guy.
Yeah, but
he's like a good guy, but kind of fucked up.
He's a fucked up guy who ends up becoming an ally.
Yeah.
So Bernice, as we were saying, she has to get bailed out of jail because she got busted in a prostitution sting because they thought she was also a prostitute. And her big thing is like, guys, I got this photo. This photo shows that some crazy shit was going on.
Some conspiracy stuff happening.
Yeah, 4 people standing.
We're standing around.
And they weren't getting pregnant. That's what you go to the carnival
for. It was so weird. Yeah.
And this photo ends up becoming a plot point because then it's like the film goes missing or some shit.
Yeah,
and
then the film, it turns out, was like pulled out of the canister, so it's all completely exposed and there's no picture there anymore.
The bottom line that we take away from this is that there is some sort of a conspiracy going on between a lot of the different people who are who hold power within the town, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be important later on.
I should point out, though, nothing suspicious was happening with these people. These people were at a town carnival, standing there talking to each other.
Yes.
In a park, I believe, or something.
Yeah, this photo really isn't important. There's just like a couple characters who were from out of town that are in the picture.
And so literally the story is people from in town talk to people from out of town. That's it.
Yep.
That's the story.
Nothing that needs to be abridged about this.
So Hank, the pastor, his house gets graffitied. And it's like, oh no, this might all be connected.
With a swear word, and I'm not sure what word it's
hard
supposed
to say
to be.
because it's blank.
And it's like you're dead meat, comma, blank.
Underscore. Yeah.
Would that be bitch? Would that be fucker?
Cunt. It's
Cunt.
got,
I think it has to be.
It's like a place in the UK, so they just use that all over the place.
I was waiting for the revelation that he had graffitied his own house. Because it's nice to see that the tactic has not changed.
Well, it's like, so the graffiti happened during the carnival, I guess?
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
What's important here is that the police chief is showing up
That's
and
who you
also
are.
giving Hank the runaround.
Yeah.
Which again lets us know he might be connected.
The police chief is a man named Alf Brummel.
Yeah. Alf.
That's a normal name.
Descendant of Beau Brummel.
Yeah, they still use Brummel to refer to him, though, instead of Alf. You'd think they call him Alf all the time because how many Alfs do you know?
Yeah,
You know?
right.
Well, again, if he was Alf, then you would know that he was a good guy. They have to call him by his last name because he's a bad guy.
Every scene that he's in, I just imagined him eating a cat, and it made it so much more entertaining.
That would be kind of, because this was like in the mid 80s, so like I forget if Alf was around in 86, but it would be really funny if it was like, Peretti's like, well, I didn't want people to be confused, so I couldn't call him, because there's already an Alf in people's minds.
Yeah, it's copyright. Gotta dodge that copyright.
So here's a quote from Hank, the pastor.
You see the problem, he said finally. Too many people don't know or don't want to know what the truth is anymore. We don't stand for something, so we fall for anything. And now guys like Lou get themselves into a fog where they can hurt their own families, start their own gossip, ruin their own reputations, make themselves miserable in their sin, and then look for someone else to blame. Just who's doing what to whom?
That is the question of our time.
I can practically hear the acoustic guitar playing underneath.
And just like in the background, someone's just like.
Is that the Civ 5 theme you were singing?
No, Lord, I lift your name on high.
Oh, sorry. I reached into the dark and just pulled out the first like worship chorus I could think of.
No, that's actually playing at the college during one of her lectures, as we will soon find out.
Yeah, exactly. Because from Hank, we see in him the upright, true to the Bible, true to the Lord. We go to the exact opposite of that now. This is at Whitmore College. Whitmore College. Marshall Hogan, again, the newspaper man, his daughter is attending this college, and she is being indoctrinated. She's being indoctrinated into the secular humanist ways.
And why do we know that? We know that because we meet her in the psychology department of this college.
The fucking den of, and this is another way that you can tell this is the 80s, because they were really worried about about psychology and like psychotherapy and analysis and that sort of thing. That was such a hot button issue. Like if this had been written now, it would not be in the psychology department. I don't know.
No, it would be in the gender studies department.
Yeah, it would be something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Marshall actually goes into the college and like finds the classroom where his daughter is taking a class and just like tries to go in to the classroom and gets kicked the fuck out.
But evilly.
Very evilly. Here we are now in the college as Marshall is advancing toward the classroom. AJ, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Finally, he began to make out the words of the lecture as he drew near room 101. So if we settle for a simple ontological formula, I think, therefore I am, that should be the end of the question. But being does not presuppose meaning. Yeah, here was more of that college stuff. That funny conglomeration of $64 words which impress people with your academic prowess.
New York Times reporter.
But can't get you a paying job. Marshall smirked to himself a little bit. Psychology. If those shrinks could just agree for a change, it would help. First, Sandy blamed her snotty attitude on a violent birth experience. And then what was it? Poor potty training? Her new thing was self-knowledge, self-esteem, identity. She already knew how to be hung up on herself. Now they were teaching it to her in college.
Yeah.
19-year-olds discovering themselves? Fuck out of here. They don't have any identity.
I love how Marshall's clout, is based on the fact that he's like, I'm for the big city, the New York Times. But anyway, $10 words like existence or something, or like, I think, therefore I am. Who's ever heard of that shit ever? I'm a big city newspaper guy. I don't even fucking know what I think, therefore I am is.
It's also the use of $64 words here, I think, is very important because Frank Peretti writes like a 7th grader. And by that, I mean, he looks at a phrase, a $10 word. But he's like, what's more than a $10 word? 64 is a lot more.
The $64,000 pyramid.
Yes.
I think that's literally probably what it is.
It probably is.
Yeah.
Wild.
I do want to include just this little part here, which is his first description of a woman in the book.
Yes.
And it just goes whoosh.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason, Marshall had expected an older woman. Skinny, her hair in a bun, wearing horn-rimmed glasses with a little beady chain looped around her neck. But this one was a startling surprise. Something right out of a lipstick or fashion commercial.
The hottest thing that Frank can think of.
Long blonde hair, trim figure, deep, dark eyes that twitched a bit, but certainly needed no glasses, horn-rimmed or otherwise.
What?
Every
Glasses
mortal...
keep your eyes from twitching. Everyone knows this.
It's true. Every human being in this book is described like they're in the Sears catalog.
Yes.
That's just everyone here is a Sears catalog model.
There are so many slender men in this book. I'm surprised they weren't in a production of Ivanov that Brian once saw.
Oh,
It
boy.
is deep cut. But he describes a lot of the women the way you would like creepy people on like Actors Access like look for women. So it's like slender, dignified redhead, or like I'd imagine he would like look for an actress by saying corpse and then in parentheses sexy. You know what I mean? Like
he's got that, but if he's describing like one of the protagonists, like women, it's like she had like she was a real doll, but she had grit too.
yes.
Yeah, they're all like featureless. It's like her eyes are dark and her hair is blonde.
Yeah, or they're like she was attractive, and then blah 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 blah, and it's like you just have to infer that Frank finds these women incredibly hot, but can't say it.
Well, that would be unfaithful to his wife.
That's true, yeah. And the only reason this woman gets described in such detail is because she's evil.
Yeah,
and
temptress.
And we soon learn just how evil she is. You know, once she sees Marshall, he has a panic attack, which is just the result of an anxiety demon, like digging its talons into his shoulders or whatever.
That's what causes my panic attacks.
Yeah,
it's a demon. It's a demon, AJ.
I'm so
Welcome
glad
to
I
growing
finally
up
know.
with this, by the way. Everything you just said. Yes.
This is the way that the demons are framed up throughout this book. That like the demons aren't just. There's a couple of the demons who are just guys, but generally speaking, they are specific thought patterns or characteristics. And I want to read an example of this. We meet this demon named Complacency. Here we're going to meet a few demons. A demon of lust, a slithery creature with darting and shifty eyes and slippery hide, overheard and joined in, snatching Complacency with his long, sharp talons. "And where have you been sleeping today?" it asked with a sneer.
I did not sleep!
Complacency retorted.
I caused people to sleep!
To lust and steal innocence is far better.
But someone must turn away the eyes of the others.
Lust thought that over and gave a smirk of approval. He dropped Complacency rudely, as those who watched laughed. Complacency passed Deception, but didn't bother to ask him anything. Deception was the proudest, haughtiest demon of them all. Very arrogant. There's that very again. Very arrogant.
Incredibly.
In his supposedly superior knowledge of how to control men's minds. His appearance was not even as gruesome as the other demons. He almost looked human. His weapon, he boasted, was always a compelling, persuasive argument with lies ever so subtly woven in.
I want to point in at the end there's a lot of dotted lines under that. That's because on Kindle, it shows you passages that were popular that a lot of other people highlighted.
655 people have highlighted this.
So that's one of the popular passages that everyone's like, I've learned a lot from this.
God, how many like youth group sermons have like involved this?
So yeah, these are the demons, right? Deception, lust, complacency, murder, lawlessness, jealousy,
stinking thinking,
and of course rape. all different demons doing different things. And I just wanted to take a second to ask, Scott, you had mentioned, growing up with this shit, thinking that things that feel bad are actually just metaphysical demons.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
It's the best, and I recommend it to everyone. No,
okay, cool.
I mean, it's I had this like theory recently that like the kind of the next big kind of pop like kind of TikTok spirituality thing is going to be something like this. It's going to be just Christians in general, and it's going to be people being like, I was into tarot and astrology and doing OnlyFans, and then, but I wanted to feel real love, and that was when I found Jesus or whatever. And then a chunk of them though are going to make the shift straight into this kind of thing where it was like when I would look at TikTok, it's like these like 5 seconds, but 5 seconds is all it takes for a demon to enter your life. Right. Because Frank's theology here is extraordinarily like the sort of theosophy that he's freaked out by. Like it's it fits in really, really, really well with this. And I think like, it's like my parents weren't big on like actual, like there are demons everywhere, but they were into sort of satanic panic stuff. Sure. We kind of towed the line, but the schools I went to and the churches I went to, there was a lot more demons running around in that thing kind of specifically. Yeah. So there was just a lot more demons hanging around, but and so there was definitely a time from maybe, I don't know, 4th through maybe 8th or 9th grade, maybe afterwards, actually, even when I was in high school, where there was this sort of the suspicion that a lot of things, not everything, but a lot of things, there was no great rule to this. There's also not a great rule set to in this book, like what is and isn't caused by an angel or a demon. Especially since like angels and demons seem to walk around and do one at a time.
Right. He sets them up so concretely, but then all of their like interventions in the real world couldn't be more vague.
Yeah, they're incredibly, except for every now and again, there's like he's like holding a truck on the road or something.
Right. It's always a car thing.
But yeah, no. So like that was the thing. It was like, especially if you had like any mental health issues, that was straight up a demon. That was like, and actually psychology or having any sort of like meds was either straight up evil or is just like not like, trusting God's best.
I had a teacher in high school who we called Waldo because he looked like Where's Waldo. But he always talked about how he used to be depressed as a teenager, and all that he really needed was to go to church more and stop listening to heavy metal, and the demons of depression finally left him alone.
Oh, okay. I had the opposite experience with that, oddly enough. Even in like my much more reasoned, like I'm reading Francis Schaeffer and C.S. Lewis, and like I'm doing some mere Christianity shit at you, and I know my apologetics, and I'm very like sort of like neo-reformed, Christian guy. Even then, there was still sort of like there's still like demons around and stuff. And in my adult life, some friends, a guy I was in a band with, his uncle, he was the pastor of sort of a break off Christian Missionary Alliance church. It was like the guy was like the Christian Missionary Alliance church that was headed by his brother was insufficiently into deliverance ministry. And so this guy split off and formed a house church.
Of course, a church where they listen to house music.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, was in the heart.
And watch Deliverance.
And that was like, I think in my adult life, the most like pure version of this that I found. And they were going to, they were kind of bringing in like grifters who were like, I like totally raise the dead in Mexico all the time.
My
resurrected girlfriend lives in Canada. You haven't met her, but. So they were always like specifically doing things like I'm casting homosexuality or a spirit of rebellion or something like.
Because that's a really important thing for these people too, is that you name the actual demon, right?
That gives you power over them.
The demon of sassiness, the demon of serving cunt. Yeah.
right.
Essentially, And which is why the strong man showing up later in this, that is a ripped straight directly out of this kind of thing. Like those people that I knew, they would talk about the strong man all the time. And stuff, because it comes from whichever verse it is where it's like 10 men can hold a strong man, but whatever. I forgot to look it up before this, but there's some Bible verse that they take to be about spiritual warfare and stuff. So it was a lot of just kind of like low rent exorcisms, because like and by low rent I mean it wasn't like your actual sort of like, okay, we need to do our rites and all this other stuff. It was just like, hey, no, you need like someone to pray for you. And so like I've been around a few churches that were doing deliverance things, and so I've watched some low-key exorcisms happen and stuff. Yeah, it's great. And like it's really cathartic for the people involved. I mean, it's horrendous about everything it's telling you about themselves and agency and what is good and evil and that kind of thing. It's awful in every other way. However, I got to say, though, primo show.
Pretty metal, yeah.
So when I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend who was Tobias from
Funke.
From Funke from Arrested Development. He was my imaginary friend. He just left blue handprints all over the wall. No, from the Animorphs series, because Animorphs takes place in San Diego, California, and there's red-tailed hawks freaking everywhere. So mine was sort of rationales, and I would talk to Tobias, and I would hear the voice in my head talk to me or whatever, not in a schizophrenic way, but just in a way that imaginary friends are. So reading this and knowing about these demons that they say are crouching on your shoulders or whatever, I mean, did any of you make imaginary friends with the supposed demons that were on your shoulder? Because I feel like that would be my tactic to deal with the horror of having this clawing thing on my head is try and make it my friend.
No, because talking to them is kind of
gives them power.
Yeah, that's your way into madness there. And in fact, a lot of Dungeons and Dragons paranoia is because it's the idea is that it's tricking you into dealing with them.
When we summoned Shalman on that Adventures in Odyssey episode a year ago.
Yeah, that's the thing. Just by tricking them, that's enough.
Right. Yeah. And we see that because Dungeons and Dragons. One of the main things that they were saying was that the demon possession is from Dungeons and Dragons is making these kids commit suicide, and you see that here in this book where characters commit suicide as a demon.
I cannot wait to talk about that.
Yeah, fantastic shit.
But
this is gonna get the end of this conversation is just gonna be so awful.
It's gonna be so bad, and we're still in the part where things are a little bit lighthearted and fun. And in that respect, I do want to say I want to read his description of what the demons look like.
Please
because
do.
It's
does it involve talons or yellow eyes, AJ?
Yeah. No, it's even better. I think it's one of my favorite things I've ever read. He was like a hamstrung little gargoyle. Half humanoid, half animal, totally demon.
Yes, I had that written down in my notes for that reason. It's so good.
I had to take a lap around my apartment after that.
So funny.
Yeah. One of the little interesting things about the demons when you kind of see them together is they refer to them each other as fellow workers. And
yes.
There's this very,
of the world, perhaps, who may or may not unite.
Yeah, they refer the angels do not refer to each other as fellow workers or anything. They're clear on their military hierarchy.
There is at one point too. There is a very brief one of the protagonists ends up in the cell with a Marxist. Did you catch that?
Yeah. He was a mugger who was a very vociferous Marxist.
So weird.
That. Well, the demons themselves. Yeah, right.
That's what I'm saying. The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money.
It's true.
Yeah.
The naming conventions of these demons is also preposterous to me because there's persuasion, jealousy, complacency, and Lucius?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
he got an actual name.
Yeah, so some demons are named after the thing they do, and then other demons just have normal names.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
Lucius,
lost track of the names after a while, and so I'd be reading a segment of a chapter and thinking I was reading demons talking to each other, but it was actually angels talking to each other.
Yeah, I mean,
back and forth because real demons were confusing my mind theologically.
Yeah.
I read this book. It wasn't a single sitting, but it took me maybe 4 hours to read this book cover to cover. Because I really just kind of skimmed it.
I don't know how you're able to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I did skim. I was reading for comprehension, but it's not a book that requires a great deal of mental lifting.
And you had read it before, right? You had read
it. Very, very long time.
Yeah. I was running off of my memories and then which piecemealed my way through the book over various versions because it's hard to get through this book. And not because it's it's just a slog. He uses 5 paragraphs for one
read.
Thing. Yeah.
Well, a couple more. Let's add a couple more pieces into that meal. Marshall begins to dig into what's going into the town. Right, he starts doing his journalism shit. We learn that the evil professor lady from earlier is fucking the chief police. So that's a thing that's happening.
Yeah.
At the church, meanwhile, Hank is facing a vote of no confidence because that, as we may remember from that bit that Scott read earlier, he's a very theologically sound guy, up to and including being willing to excommunicate somebody from the church for being an adulterer.
I don't care. Oh my God. I don't care about any of this.
This is somehow given the most weight out of anything in the book. Like, including the climax.
Yeah. It's insane.
And again, he doesn't lose. He just wins.
Well,
every time they just resolve the situation.
He wins by an old lady showing up and casting a vote in his favor against the resolution. And the guy, the adulterer himself, shows up and casts a vote, even though he was excommunicated from the fucking church.
See, this would never happen in a Baptist church because we have committees. We set up committees. There is a select group of people who makes each decision.
Where is the diaconate?
Hey, we got a hierarchy, okay? Catholics got a fucking hierarchy.
But the main function of this really is just to introduce us to the other primary mechanic of this world, which is prayer. Now, we had sort of mentioned this before. Prayer provides cover. And prayer cover is basically a stat boost. I'm not sure which stats specifically it boosts. It does stack. I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's actually true. Yes, it does. And later in the book, they do talk about this essentially.
And so we learn about this through this scene right here. Where Edith, again, she's that old lady who was one of the tie-breaking votes, prays for something to happen. Lord God, she said, and the warmth of the Holy Spirit flowed through them. I build now a hedge around this young couple, and I bind the spirits in Jesus' name. Satan, whatever your plans for this town, I rebuke you in Jesus' name, and I bind you, and I cast you out. And then there's like a little dot to show that like we're moving in space. Clunk! Rafar's eyes darted toward the sound that had interrupted his talking and saw two swords fallen from their owner's hands. Whoa! So like, again, you pray, stuff happens to the demons.
Rafar is also Baal Rafar or Lord Rafar.
Yes.
He fought in some great battle against the angels in Mesopotamia at some point.
In Babylon. Yeah. Would you say the town is in a state of Rafar madness?
Yeah, I would.
Yes. Yeah. This is also a good place to bring up the notion of territorial spirits, which is huge in this book. This whole book is based on it. And it definitely existed before this book, but I dare say that this is the one that if you hear someone talk about it now in these kinds of terms, it comes more from this book than any pre-existing doctrine. And that was what was kind of most interesting to me about this early part was that it was about, the spirit of this place, which like you can get in the Bible more like in the sense of like, I was, held back by like the Prince of Persia, not the game.
I was held back by Jordan Mechner specifically.
Yeah.
Jake Gyllenhaal burst through the door and said, "Not today." Time.
The notion that like these places and cities and territories, which they seem to mostly be man-made sort of places, like they're civilizations, like and stuff. Yeah. It's not like the spirit of the Grand Canyon or something. It'd be like
it's not like fairies or elves or
It's much more of like an angel or a demon or something of that sort. And part of the huge conflict of this book is the whole they're going to take over the town, which is, by the way, the most vague shit ever. Like, I don't know what that means. It's like, the town will be ours.
Very unclear.
Yeah, but it's like that whole thing of like, no, there's geographic territory up for grabs here that the angels and demons are fighting over. And you, a suburban Christian man, by praying, you are essentially a troop taking actual territory. We're not going to lose this like we lost Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. It's the 80s kind of thing. Like there's so much.
Think about that.
There is so much weird like military.
Well, the angels are like wearing fatigues or something.
He refers to them as fatigues because they're wearing angel outfits, but instead of like the robes,
like khaki.
They have tunics and pants. Essentially, he's like, they're not gonna have robes. I'm putting pants on them, but the rest of it is normal.
And this territorial stuff, it really is. It's happening one building at a time, one block at a time. Yeah. There are battle lines that are drawn, and the forces of darkness are encroaching. And I'm also curious to hear just sort of our thoughts about this prayer warrior mechanic. Again, like the base stat boost that we receive and then stack bonus for every 10. I don't know if it's an exponential thing or what. I'm thinking it might be. I'm thinking it might be that like...
This is one of the things that gets Frank Peretti in a lot of hot water. Book publishing is so funny in the Christian world because like you want to make like attendant materials like study guides or like things where you can be like, oh, here's how this lines up with the Bible. You can use it as like a Sunday school curriculum for a couple of months.
Sure, yeah.
Frank Peretti, to his credit, has never done this because he maintains that he writes fiction. He also just gets a lot of heat because people are like, this is bad theology. This makes demons look too powerful. And it's like, because again, Pentecostal stuff is embarrassing to a lot of other evangelical Christians. We talked about that a little bit in our Jesus Camp episode.
Right.
It's just like,
a lot of that is aesthetic in nature.
Yeah.
It's a very...
At the core, this is one of the funny things about that Michael W. Smith thing I mentioned, because Michael W. Smith is about as down the middle Mitt Romney voter, like CCM guy, as you can imagine, but he's making things that are, Frank Peretti inspired, which is howling Pentecostal, we're 2 clicks down from snake handling at this point.
It's the longest Carmen song in existence.
Yes.
What this book is.
Actually, Carmen is, I think, of all the big CCM people, Carmen's your guy who captures this perfectly.
But so Frank is like, well, if you want the real thing, read the Bible. But a lot of his other horror stories are metaphorical, right? They're like, oh, The Oath is about a town where everyone's taken over by sin, and the sin manifests in the form of a dragon and also like a wasting disease. But here it's like he's talking about shit that he actually believes 100%. And when you start talking that way about prayer, you start falling into weird territory because you can't like easily... I'd argue you can't really theologically define Christian prayer in any way without limiting the power of God, which itself is blasphemy. So you just kind of have to be like, you just should pray. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you why. We can't really get into the mechanics of it because
it does stuff.
I would even argue that to be so over the top with prayer is in and of itself. Like, there's the Bible passage, what Jesus said, like, when you pray, don't pray like those guys who go out in the streets and are really loud about it.
Which Nick does.
Exactly.
That's how they win.
Yeah.
It's weird.
He goes into interceding a lot. And like, I think that's like, because he gets into like deep mechanics. I think mechanics, I think, is a good word for this, because this does treat it like a real, like actual rule set. There are hard rules of this world. They're terribly defined and they make no sense and they're inconsistent. But it is like, no, he's interceding for them, meaning that he's like basically going, hey, God, please do not smite these people, please. Basically, Abraham and, with Sodom, I guess, and stuff. It's that kind of this thing where you're sort of praying for a wicked city and God's gone, all right, okay, kind of thing. And it's like, it's never really elucidated exactly what that was. Like God was like, okay, you've convinced me or something. Yeah. There's not a lot of convincing God of things in this theology because that would be, blasphemous and weird. So you kind of are stuck in what is the point of this other than we're just told to do it?
You're just giving power-ups to the angels.
I want to talk about the end of Pokemon, the first movie.
Okay.
Because I think it's very...
Speaking of demons.
I think it's... speaking of demons who are coming to corrupt your children. There is something that works about that movie's ending for me. Which is that when all the Pokemon tears cry their tears and they bring Ash back to life.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Now imagine that like 10 minutes into Pokemon the first movie, Ash dies. And all of the Pokemon cry and bring him back to life. And then every 10 minutes until the end of the movie, the Pokemon keep crying and bringing Ash back to life. He just keeps dying in a variety of ways. Eventually, the Pokemon tears would seem kind of cheap, right? And a little bit dumb storytelling-wise and a little bit predictable. And that's what reading this book is like. It's like being in a car with somebody who hasn't quite mastered a manual transmission. And every 10 minutes, someone dies and gets reborn. And dies and gets reborn.
It's Peter Pan walking onto the stage at the beginning of the play and being like, Tinkerbell is already dead. You need to start clapping.
Yes.
And you cannot fucking stop until we're done.
Exactly.
All is lost every 10 pages.
But and then they get it right back 3 pages later.
Yeah.
But he tries to convince you that all is lost. But again, it's for things like, oh no, this pastor guy might be voted out and it's the end of the world. And I'm like, well, you haven't convinced me adequately that it is the end of the world.
Yeah.
So why the fuck should I care that an angel rigs the vote? Because that's what he does. The woman is sick and dying, and the angel revitalizes her enough to get her to the church to vote. It's a rigged vote. The angels cheat, which is again a wild thing.
One more time, it's just to reiterate, it's 2 votes that he wins by. One of which was somebody who almost was dying, and the second person was an ineligible voter.
Look, we have all done this when we've played Civ, right? Like you do a coup at the one city-state, you bring one civilization back to life, and then you win the World Congress.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now we know about the prayer cover system. Again, key mechanic, one of the great mechanics in gaming. It's right up there with the CQC and Metal Gear Solid.
I think there actually is something similar in the chiral cover in Death Stranding. That's what you're spending the whole game doing, is building the chiral network, but it's with prayers.
Perfect. Yes. This Present Darkness was actually the first Strand type book.
Yes, the Strand-like, yes.
But some more plot happens. Marshall then goes to the Church for Fake Christians.
Yeah. So Marshall had this he got kicked out of his daughter's class. He had an argument with his daughter. He also talked to the police chief. But in both the cases of his daughter's class and the police chief, whenever someone's talking to him, he finds himself suddenly kind of hypnotized, and he can't say no to them. And then he just sort of sees himself out, and it's like, whoa, what's going on? And he goes to this other church. There's 2 churches in town. Right. There's the real church, the tiny Pentecostal one. And then there's this big, it's not like a mega church. It's like an Episcopalian church.
It's like your mainline sort of milquetoast kind of thing. They'd probably let a woman speak there.
It even says, and I'm again just reading from the book here about the congregation, many of them were professionals, doctors, teachers, lawyers, self-proclaimed philosophers and poets. A very large segment was from or connected in some way with the college. They took fastidious notes on Young's message, as if it were a lecture.
Did not God say, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness? What had remained in the darkness of tradition and ignorance, we find now revealed within ourselves. We rediscover the knowledge we have always had as a race. We are inherently divine in our very essence, and have within ourselves the capacity for good, the potential to become, as it were, gods.
Wow.
Made in the exact likeness of Father God, the ultimate source of all that is. People can't see the gesticulating. I'm doing the Bill Clinton.
It's really effective.
Thumb on the fist.
Also, anyone I knew who ever said would use that phrase "Father God" when they were praying or whatever, always fundamentalist.
Yeah,
always the most fundamentalist. Yeah, and Father God, we come to you today.
God,
blah 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 blah. Yeah.
This is Oliver Young, the fake minister, and he is a cucked lib. And his whole thing...
He's actually getting cucked by that psychology teacher.
Oh my God, that's right. Yeah.
Because they're all sleeping with her. All these guys are fucking her and sucking her and getting little meditation sessions with her. This
is a very strange person, this lady. I'm going to fuck every man in town so that I can get them to do meditation with me.
Yes.
Yep. For the purposes of land acquisition.
We begin learning from this sermon, from other stuff, kind of what the core theology of the conspiracy is. It's this idea that they are themselves going to ascend to godhood or a godlike level, and they are sort of hypnotizing everybody in the town to believe this. Now, this is one for AJ. Again, curious how this landed with you, given that you, unlike us, were not raised to be on guard from such witchcraft for your entire upbringing.
I mean, the thing about every argument against Peretti's morals in the book is that I agreed, at least in part, with some of everything. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't for everything that he said was evil or bad, I was like, actually, that kind of sounds fine. And then he's like, no, this is bad and you must fear it. I'm like, I don't know, that seems pretty reasonable.
Because it's tempting. AJ, it's temptation.
I see. Yeah. Yes. I mean, in terms of the hypnosis thing, it's just it's such an old hat trick at this point, and
they're all hypnostics.
I briefly thought that Peretti was on Twitter because there was that tweet that went around that just said that someone was like immune to sissy hypno, and I was just sitting here being like, is that what she's doing?
Yeah.
Is she like sitting all these men down and bimbifying
She's doing
them?
IRL sissy hypno for sure. That's pretty crazy. See, that Peretti had his eyes out for this shit long before it was sort of in the mainstream consciousness.
At that point, it was all on tape.
You had to seek out.
The particular paranoia of this is interesting because I actually don't know where Peretti landed at the time on the what was the daycare center? McMartin daycare.
I'm not familiar with this. What
the McMartin preschool? It's also like the most expensive court case that the U.S. ever had. They spent tons of money on it, huge amounts of resources, years and years and years of litigating literally hundreds of charges against these people for committing satanic ritual abuse against children that didn't happen.
That like one of the big problems was that like these kids were like really coached to say a lot of different to different things, and like in ways that I think Peretti would probably say were like essentially akin to hypnosis or just high suggestion stuff. I wonder where he landed on that at the time. If he was like, no, but that shit's real or something. That's the actual way to truth.
That's the interesting thing is like, here we have these characters. This happens a little bit later in the story, but rape and molestation accusations end up being used as a tool of power against godly men
over
in this story.
And over again. It's like half a dozen times in this book.
And it's created using, well, one character just seems like she's fully malicious, but also demon possessed, right? She's coming on to the pastor, and then she does a whole Potiphar's wife situation where she tears at part of his clothing, runs off, and blah, blah, blah.
Classic.
Shut up and play the hits, Peretti.
And the molestation thing comes about through a regression hypnosis thing, which is the basis for what led to all of this satanic panic stuff, right? It was that book written by a guy who's like, oh yeah, I have this patient who uncovered all of these childhood memories that she had repressed, saying that her family was part of a satanic cult abusing her. Also, I've married my patient now. Don't ask questions. Anyway, here's my book.
If you hear any accusations against me, by the way, that's demons implanting that in people's brains.
So it's almost like Frank is seeing that stuff in the news, and then he's just turning it around to a different thing because it's probably something that he experienced in some form or another.
Right. I think that like that's what's interesting about this is that Frank's theology is really in line with a lot of the kind of false teachings that he's kind of, like the issue is not like things like, oh, these people are going to manipulate you into doing bad stuff and it's going to fuck up your life or whatever. It's no. There is the spiritual world. They can be completely invoked in different ways and give you power. And they will do all this stuff. Like they'll fucking make you immortal. They'll do all this stuff. However, they're actually mean or something. It's like like that. Like
there's just good ones and bad ones.
Yeah, Steve who shows up and gives you long life and riches. His actual name is Balthazar or something. And in the end, you'll go to hell. But you will essentially though live forever and have endless riches or something. So it's like it is a thing where, Peretti's not like, this shit is fake and these people are manipulating you via this fake shit. He's like, no, it is so incredibly real. They're just playing the evil side of it. The Christianity of this sort takes for granted a lot of like the kind of spiritualist and theosophist type of stuff that they're panicking about when by the time like the New Age shit comes around, because the New Age is such like warmed over 60s counterculture kind of like, and then like old theosophy, Helena Blavatsky type shit.
When we get back, we will dig into more claims of various wrongdoings and other such things. If you thought this first half was a doozy, boy howdy, just wait until part 2.
Now the book is really starting.
So join us in the darkness after this.
Greetings, true believers. The demon scam here. Perseus Malefactum here. Yes, that will do it. Your local bookmonger and perfectly normal human man. Fellow humans, do you like religion? Do you like the Bible? Do you like your Bible but wish it were louder? Introducing the Living Bible. It has everything you love about the normal Bible, plus an all-seeing eye that can peer into your very brain. Bound in the finest of human skin, with a lock made of teeth of indeterminate origin, the Living Bible also has the ability to record your life in real time and predict every possible outcome of your future. It chronicles all the great life events, birth, death, and others. So get your Living Bible today and witness your life stretch out before you. Everything you've ever done and ever will do carved into the fleshy pages of the Living Bible. It all looks so boring, doesn't it? Written out like that? Just a series of tasks checked off a list over and over and over again. Go to sleep, wake up, go to work, repeat until you die. So why not change it? Pick up a pen and start writing new things into the Living Bible. Something small to start. You fix the creak in the table, or get a new pair of shoes, or turn your cat purple. But then you start to think bigger. You win the lottery. You make a family in a cute 3-bedroom house upstate, and you're happier than you've ever been. But all the while, you've noticed your skin started to shrivel, your hair's falling out in clumps, and your eyes have begun to merge into one singular vessel. Your husband asks if you're all right, and you find you can read his thoughts. He knows something is wrong, but you don't tell him because you know he wouldn't understand. Instead, you write in your book, and he stops thinking all those worrying thoughts as your teeth shift and crack in your mouth, forming the shape of a lock. Your skin growing tighter and tighter. You're so close, you think, I'll be happy if I change just a few more things. And the knowledge you have now, the world you can see now is beautiful and bright and full of dark secrets. You want to know it all. So you write in the book. And your husband wakes up the next morning and rolls over to find not you, but another Living Bible. He screams, but you don't hear him, because you are finally happy. So order your Living Bible today. The only book whose spine is an actual spine. The Living Bible, putting the I in Bible.
We had a lot of offers of people who wanted to option it for a movie or a TV show and stuff. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many of them actually could have done it or anything. We were not interested at all, but that would be I've thought about what would the pitch have to have been for me to go, yeah, that sounds great. And I think, diorama, fully animated movie in sort of diorama form.
Henry Selick, yeah.
It's just Leica does a Night in the Woods movie. Yeah. I think that would have worked, probably. Yeah. You can just reuse some of the Paranorman sets, honestly. So,
yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Frank Peretti talks about, because he's had a few movie adaptations here and there, and he has tried to write a screenplay for This Present Darkness, and he can't. It surprised me with this abridged version of the book. He said he can't get it under 5 hours.
Oh, come on.
Why?
There's so much good shit in there. You got
how do you choose what to take out? It's like killing your children.
Yeah,
no, exactly.
Well, listen to the abridged version, honestly. Yeah. The abridged version, it's just they run around in circles for a really long time. Yeah. And there's all these characters that come in and out and in and out.
Oh my God, yeah.
And you could cut nearly all of them and it would have been fine. You could, or you could just be like, oh yeah, then there was Steve, he's dead. You don't have to have a conversation with Steve and then later go, Steve's dead. You could just go, oh no, Steve died under mysterious circumstances. You don't actually have to go, right. I had a conversation with Steve. He told me nothing.
And then he died.
It's why is this? And it's this fucking redundancy. He just says everything 3 or 4 times when he needs it once.
New Age religion is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the story. We are also introduced around halfway through to a new guy, or in this case, it's a new girl. Her name is Carmen.
She is a godless Jezebel.
Who is
possessed of demons of lust and making married men think some thoughts they shouldn't be thinking.
Right.
She is sent in it was the perfect cover is to be this mysterious hot woman that shows up randomly and really wants to ingratiate themselves in with all the male heads of everything that she's involved with.
With the pastor and the editor of the newspaper. Like, it's just fucking nonsense.
Also, go seek out the protagonists.
Was she
go
around?
The protagonist to get fucked.
I missed this. Is she new in town, or has she been there for a long time?
I don't think it even says.
I thought she was the lady who recently divorced, but I could be getting that mixed up with someone else who was only talked about in the first half of the book. I don't know.
The only thing we really need to know about Carmen is that, yes, A, the whole possessed of lust and trying to tempt our protagonists, and B, after she fails to seduce Hank, the minister, she goes off to the newspaper and basically becomes a sleeper agent there.
Yeah. And she taps their phones.
This is a running thing in the book, is that the men of God, and men in general, but the men of God are tempted into sin, whereas a lot of the women are possessed of something that is that's either part of their nature intrinsically, or is a demon actually working through them. Like, there's something about the way the women are versus the way the men are tempted to be. That's only popped up in a couple books before. But
Peretti's playing the hits.
It is something that was interesting about it, because he tries to have these female protagonists. Bernice is, I think, the one that comes off best. But most of the other ones are somehow corrupted or tempted or something that has been working through them generally. Right. Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. Like Hank and Marshall have this sort of inner strength that's like cultivated and stuff is a part of their character, and they need help to kind of, stick with it from angels, but they have like
prayer, of course. The prayer helps the angels better ward off the, demons of temptation or what have you.
Right. Yeah. They have, and there's a couple times where the angels are like, okay, we got to hold off. Don't do anything to protect these guys. They have to go through something here. They have to be tested. And that's not really explained why that is, but like they have to be tested.
Well, for plot, Scott.
We have to kill another 50 pages of like, and then he walked into this other room and it was very spooky. And then he walked into the kitchen. No one there, but he was very spooky.
We're at this point where now they're getting haunted by demons, and the demons are filling their houses. And all that amounts to is they wake up and feel kind of shitty.
Yeah, they get spooked. There's these walking around the house in the baseball bat, very sitcom-ish thing happens here. And then like he's like assailed by the demons of getting freaked out at night because you think someone's in your house even though they're not. And he's like, what? Do the thing. He's like creeping from room to room. And then, oh no, he like finds somebody and he turns on the light and screams, oh no, it was just his wife. We scared each other kind of thing. It's like, but that is pitched as a battle of the fucking ages when it happens.
Yes, because he establishes this tension of like, oh no, this is a scary house. There's like something weird happening. I feel deeply uneasy. He makes his way down this like darkened hallway, all the tropes that you would expect from this. But then insanely, he cuts to the demons around him going, you're feeling really scared right now, aren't you? Scared. And all the tension is immediately gone. It's like watching Freddy Krueger like plan the dreams before like subjecting his nightmares to them, like going through each step by step. It's like, well, I don't know. We did the bank con last week. Are we doing that one again? It's truly mind-boggling how inept he is at scaring you.
Yeah, because he can't, and it comes from the theology. I do think it does because he can't, for lack of better words, like deceive you into thinking that this person is good when they turn out to be bad, or this person, or there's a presence here, I don't know what it is, or something. Like that mystery is something Frank, it's like, someone will show up and be like, it's like the police chief showed up. He was really evil or something like that. There's not like a lot of like, there's no questions. And then they show you exactly what's going on. It's it makes everything mundane.
Yeah, it was like Marshall wondered why he seemed so evil. And then it cuts away to the demon on his shoulder was making him evil that day.
It's incredibly bizarre the way he does it, because he can't allow mystery or a sense of otherness or unknown. There are no unknowns in this book. There's an answer for every single thing with specificity and
like
a name.
There is in other Frank Peretti books.
I was about to say the same thing. It doesn't stay this way. Like even in Hangman's Curse.
Yeah, there's like misdirection.
The way it resolves is really stupid, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it sets up a lot of questions and leaves you asking them for a while.
Like to the point where the Visitation even opens where it's kind of vaguely describing this crucifixion. Right, it's like, oh, he's bound to the wood, and like there's people jeering him, and they're calling him, and it's like, oh, he's talking about Jesus, and then you find out 3/4 of the way through, oh no, he's talking about this weird satanic false messiah that has actually emerged in this sleepy Washington town. It's like, oh, he did learn, he did learn how to like pace something occasionally.
Yeah. And he gets into something the back half of this book, especially when we get to the very end, where he wants to write. He writes very cinematically. He writes like a movie. He does not write. It is a movie with a lot of narration.
There's dialogue and there's descriptions, and that's
he refers to this as a movie of the mind.
Okay, sweet. Again, very Garth Marenghi.
It's so Garth Marenghi, it hurts.
He has much more of the Garth Marenghi than like the Stephen King, I think. Like, because, well, the reason I said this is because like I was a huge fan of the Cooper Kids books when I was a kid. Like I read and reread those many times, and they are much better books than this is.
Yes.
Like much, much better. And they do suspense better. And they're still, it has all the problems in every other way of his writing and worldview and everything. But I do remember like the Tombs of Anak actually having some legit sort of suspense and some mystery as to what's going on and which part of, because that those series deal with a lot of like okay, well, what's the legend of this thing, and is there a mundane reason for why this is happening, or is it Satan or something like it?
It's probably Satan.
Well, the answer is usually both. Like there's some sort of actual fake out thing. He gets better with fake outs.
He gets a lot better with fake outs.
And he gets a lot better with who is actually a good guy and who's actually a bad guy.
But there are no fake outs
outs
here. Instead, we get again, Carmen, the wanton Jezebel. We get a new character named Susan. And again, she starts out as the maidservant to the big bad, but we know that she's not a bad guy because they call her Susan, which means that she's going to have a redemption arc.
There's this ranch outside of town. It's in a valley between two mountains or something, and it's nondescript. It's almost cool. What he's describing is like almost cool. It's like this totally blank place that has all of these things flowing in and out of it. And then it's just like, and it's staffed by all of these weird kind of Chinese-ish guys. And it's like, what?
Yeah, it's a little... This is, I believe, where the real, because like the demonic names being all sort of like quasi-Persian-ish in a lot of ways, or like being the actual like, like, that shit's in the Bible because like that was like their neighbors, not because that's if you're in America, that's the evil place where evil comes from.
To that point exactly, I'd love to jump forward a little bit to a scene that we get after all this, where now we are in New York City. But suddenly we just are in New York.
The maidservant is out there. She's working for the big dude who's working in this nondescript camp. That's basically Rajneeshpuram.
Alexander Kasich is his name. And again, he's referred to as Kasich.
Senator John Kasich.
John Kasich.
And there's some angels out in New York, and they're like, oh, let's hope this works. The prayer cover's real bad out here.
No Christians in New York.
So
just Catholics.
Is that on a per capita basis? Because like there are more Christians in New York than there are in Ashton, certainly just by sheer number. Or is it like on a percentage?
I think it has to be, because if you're not Christian, then you're automatically worshiping Satan.
Yeah.
So here we have a description of what the angels see at the hotel, where the Universal Consciousness Society, which is basically the overarching cult, is having, I don't know, their annual gala or something.
Yeah, the Consciousness Con.
The annual evil meditation.
Well, there's one point where someone says that they have a lot of friends in the UN. If you know what I mean, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, I'll say this is our global conspiracy people here. Essentially,
Tal and Guilo. Oh, by the way, there's an angel named Guilo.
More like Guido, as far as I'm concerned.
Pretty pronounced as Gilo. There's no Gui in there. But then the other audio book calls it Gilo. Yeah. So.
All right. Tal and Gilo watched with fascination. In the sky overhead, other demons began flocking to the hotel like swallows, their black, winged outlines silhouetted against the reddening sky.
Oh, winged.
A significant gathering, Captain.
Hey, I'm the only Italian here. I should get to do the Italian voice.
And continued watching. Amid the limousines were many taxis, also carrying a vast cross-section of humanity.
Oh, Jesus.
Orientals.
Oh, boy.
Africans. Europeans. Westerners who are different from Europeans.
Well, yeah, you can tell from their hats. They're
they're cowboys.
Yes. Howdy, said the demon.
Arabians, people of great power, esteem, and dignity from all over the world. Yeah, we got that with the continents thing.
Yeah.
As written in the scriptures, the kings of the earth, Tal observed, being made drunk with the wine of the great harlot's immorality.
Babylon the Great!
Said Guilo.
The great harlot rising at last!
Yes, universal consciousness, the world religion, the doctrine of demons spreading among all the nations. Babylon revived right before the end of the age.
It's the return of the Prince of Babylon, Rafar! It's
Of
me,
course.
Rafario!
And that explains why we were called.
That's who
We were
you
the
are.
last to confront him.
Why is we italicized there? That was not an emphasis.
As opposed to the others who would have...
We were called. This is horrible writing. This is just garbage story because it's like all of this has been established. So many times at this point. This has been said so many times. Anyway.
AJ, I would love to hear from you about this, being somebody who writes a fair bit. I would love to hear your take on just the mechanics of this. And
The Irishman in me was so happy today because the queen is dead.
Yeah.
And then the Italian side of me you had to make so sad by doing that impeccable accent. Look,
making the pizza. That's
Boca de Beppo. This is like, it's so racist. It's so boring. Like, again, it was so hard for me to retain anything from the angels and demons sections because they fundamentally don't do anything. You want to have characters who are actively pursuing goals, but they can't because by definition they have to have humans pray to them and then they do the things the humans tell them to do. They're vessels. They're not characters because they don't want or need anything.
They don't really have agency in terms of what their assignment is either. They get their marching orders from on high, and like you said, they get prayer support from underneath. They just exist for the sake of advancing the plot.
Yeah, and I don't know who the Great Harlot is, and like I'll never. I
that's
guess
the whore of Babylon as listed in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, it's a biblical thing.
I mean, more specifically, it's that psychologist lady.
Yeah, I actually have heard it when I was growing up referred to as the Catholic Church. So you do know the Great Harlot.
There you go. It's me.
It actually is. Yeah,
I have been the Great Harlot all along.
That's like the twist.
AJ, the whore of Babylon, did it.
Yeah, that's
he
a
thinks
t-shirt.
that he can get away with it because he's like, but I had a black angel earlier. I have a black beefcake.
He uses a lot of the same words to refer to his multicultural, multiracial angel corps, which it's not really established as to why the angels have like inherent human likenesses in this. Yeah. Because like...
Yeah, these are not biblically accurate angels.
I would have loved that though. Are you kidding me? Like just like a thing with 1,000 eyes and washboard abs. I mean, I'm on board.
And there's also demons from everywhere, right? He says his big yellow eyes studied carefully the orderly ranks of all the demons lined up around him. A horrible gathering. These were spirits from the principality levels, princes themselves of their own nations, peoples, tribes.
City-state demons.
Some were from Africa. Some were from the Orient. Several were from Europe. All were invincible.
100% demon. As far as like who they are as characters, the interesting thing is there is some. Very few people have any sort of change or arc. I think Lucius is the closest you get to a dynamic character, and he's like the demon who is the big guy, who is then the not big guy, and then is like keeps getting like replaced by bigger demons throughout this whole time that are introduced. And then like I think among the angels, the biggest drama is some guys just want to kick ass too hard.
Right.
And they
have to wait. You got to wait, guys. You can't do it yet. You got to wait.
Basically, it's that kind of thing. The whole thing is like, oh, Lord, let me loose my spear at them. And he's like, no, old chum, we can't yet. And he's like, oh, fine. And then like,
but why
like, at one point, Triskel freaks out at a demon because he just got like fucked up by Rafar or something.
God.
That's like the closest thing you get to them doing anything of any interest at all.
Which seems so counterproductive to what he's trying to do when your like greatest drama is amongst the demons, right? When your most interesting characters are the demons.
Yeah, Lucius suddenly has a thing to do in the last 2 chapters where he's like,
Now we know that the Universal Consciousness Society is trying to take over the town of Ashton by acquiring the land, the college, etc. Because I guess as goes Ashton, so too goes America. I really don't know.
Well, it's one step in the process. They're going to buy up this college town, and what do colleges do? They teach your children. Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Yeah, this is the first domino, basically.
Right.
And Bernice actually goes out and does some more sleuthing and discovers that on real estate records, which have been hidden, the whole town is getting bought up by this company called Omni International.
Yeah, and her first sign that something was wrong was she went to the usual grocery store, and now there were a bunch of immigrants working there. Like, not
I
the
missed
people.
That.
Yeah, she's like, she went to the grocery store, but the old owners weren't there anymore, and she didn't even think that the employees there like still spoke English.
Yeah,
oh boy!
I forgot about
even though you find out that the old owners are also like barely able to speak English because they're Italians.
About this book and being like pleasantly surprised, and again, this bar is so low.
Yeah,
but being pleasantly surprised how it wasn't overtly anti-Semitic. It was this part where I was just like, oh, there's these rich organization of people who just wander around the earth buying up land and getting people into their debt. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, Frank. But he steers, at least, I mean, all of this has that inherently in it and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's he takes pains, it seems, to steer clear of that. At least as far as I saw, that was the one thing I was looking out for that I did not spot. And I was like, he had to have done that on purpose. I feel like he had to have been like, I'm not going to be anti-Semitic though when I do this whole thing.
Yeah.
At least I'm not doing that, guys. Okay.
Well, it's an interesting thing because we actually observe this in Adventures in Odyssey too. There's this whole thing with like a conglomerate that wants to buy the old rec center and turn it into a strip mall with a video arcade in it.
Yeah.
And then that turns out to be owned by the devious Dutchman Regis Blackard. But like, this is like a thing, I think, in just like the 80s.
Yeah.
People talking about like private umbrella firms going up and buying a lot of land, which, was actually happening in real life.
I think it does mirror, to an extent, real world anxieties.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in terms of what was happening historically in this moment. Around the turn of, I think, the decade from the 80s to the 90s, that we all of a sudden started to see land and real estate becoming a preferred asset class. And that's just continued to accelerate.
But friends, how does Frank Peretti feel about arcades?
I was going to say.
This is my favorite passage in the book.
It's so good.
I came like a fire hose when I read this. This was my favorite
It also has one of my favorite micro redundancies.
Yeah.
It's a really good example of, that's his entire writing style. Like, used like 4 words when you maybe could have used 1.
I'm going to read this. I'm going to do this like creepy, like it's scary. Hank took a turn he'd never taken before, down a street he'd never looked at before, and finally stopped outside a business establishment he had only heard bad stories about but could never find.
Such a bad sentence.
The business establishment!
He stood outside the door, staring, amazed at the number of kids going in and out like bees.
Like bees.
Not the bees!
Yeah.
Finally, he stepped inside. Finally? How long was he out there?
He had to wait for the narration to finish so he could walk in.
Creone and Triscall tried their very best to look meek and non-threatening as they followed him.
Amazing they have Sonic characters in this too.
Big the cat.
Don't go in there.
Yeah, Triscall is approximately the size of an average human mother.
The cave was aptly named. The power it took to run the rows upon rows of flickering, beeping video games was made up for by the total absence of any other lights, except a little blue globe here and there in the black ceiling with an occasional watt meandering through it.
An occasional watt? Like
Yeah,
like it would only light occasionally?
I guess.
I don't know. A little bit of power running through it.
The power to run the rows and rows of flickering, beeping is made up for a total absence of other. That's a terrible sentence. Like, what are you talking about, Frank?
It's like running out of breath.
We've already put more thought into this sentence than Frank Peretti did writing it.
The power it took to run the rows upon rows of flickering, beeping video games was made up for.
We can't get too hung up on this one sentence because it's going to get better.
Yeah.
There was more sound than light. Heavy metal rock music pounded from the speakers all around the room and clashed painfully with the myriads of electronic sounds tumbling out of the machines. One lone proprietor sat behind his little cash register in the corner, reading a girly magazine, whenever he wasn't making change for the game players. Hank had never seen so many quarters in one place. Here were kids of all ages, with few other places to go, congregating after school and all through the weekends to hang out, hang on, play games, pair up, wander off, do drugs, do sex, do whatever.
Do sex.
I love doing sex, dude.
Hank knew this place was a hellhole. It wasn't the machines, or the decor, or the dimness. It was just the pungent, spiritual stench of demons having their heyday. He felt sick to his stomach.
Fantastic.
Is that scene in the abridged version?
No.
Damn,
coward.
Which is a shame because I remembered it from when I was a kid. Of like, it was the evil, because like it really mirrors his description of the carnival. So anytime there's games of sport or chants of any sort, Frank is like, no, that is where evil.
They're gonna hang out, hang on, tune in, drop out,
do drugs, do sex.
Yeah.
Deus Ex.
Well, he does that same description in the carnival part. He's like, get pregnant, get beat up, get whatever. And
he thinks he's doing like a parallel construction thing, and that's just not what he's doing.
No,
Scott, the three of us, we grew up, we were born at the very end of the 80s, very beginning of the 90s.
Yeah.
Arcades were in the past, kind of. Like, you went to an arcade and it was like, kind of rickety.
Or like the little room next to the movie theater.
A
like
place
a couple
that kids hung out.
Right.
Like, there was not any of this, aside from maybe the carnival cabinet. There was not any of this, like, moral panic around it. Did you experience any of that as a kid?
Right. So I should say that I was born in 81. So I was really coming into like an awareness of all this late 80s, I'd say. And then, so like maybe 88 on, I was like really aware of this kind of stuff. And then the arcade was definitely like, there were still arcades around. And stuff. They were more and more something that was either attached to like a movie theater or like a skating rink or at a mall. You'd see them at malls a lot of like that kind of like Dave and Buster's ass kind of place. Although occasionally there's a place that still exists right outside of Altoona, Pennsylvania, called Slinky's Action Zone, which is an arcade.
Like an old school, like real video arcade.
It is a shitty place. I think it's like, it probably, and apologies to any, the owner of Slinky's Action Zone if you're hearing this, but it's definitely the place.
He's a patron, actually. He loves it.
Yeah, sorry. So you like
he pays us in quarters, though. It's
a human token.
It's the most quarters we've ever seen.
It is definitely like probably like the number one spot that like 20 or 25-year-olds get busted for trying to pick up teenagers. It's that kind of place and stuff. It's just super.
That's bummer energy.
Super grimy and stuff. But there wasn't as much of a panic around arcade games. By this point, it was home consoles and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. But the arcade was much more of the, like, there was the social aspect of it. Of like, that's where you go to get involved with like bad people, as opposed to the games themselves. Because like, no one had a fucking problem with like Galaga or Pac-Man or something like that. They had a problem with all this other stuff. And so it was more of a, you're going there and like smoking cigarettes and
you're hanging out, hanging on.
I like that these kids are like going and like plowing each other in the back alleyway while this one lone attendant is just reading pornos and handing out quarters.
Yeah, like they're sucking and fucking in the Jurassic Park light gun. That's basically would have been it. Yeah.
Well, which is hilarious because like the largest arcade in the world, which is in Meredith, New Hampshire, that's called Fun Spot, is like the only arcade I've ever like really spent a lot of time at, and that's owned by a man who renamed the street leading up to his arcade John Galt Way.
Wow,
yes, dude.
Has a giant.
That is pure New Hampshire.
Yeah,
I feel the only instance of I remember is in Willowbrook Mall, which is one of the like 5 malls around where I grew up in North Jersey. In when we were in high school, so this is like late tail end of the 90s, that was the place where we would go. There was an arcade there, and that was the place where you would kind of go to sort of like meet girls. That kind of thing. It was like if it wasn't for us, it was like going to punk shows and hanging out at the arcade were the place where you met like check it out, there's some goth chicks kind of thing.
You just say it so easily, but like if Frank Peretti heard those words, he'd cower in fear.
Honestly,
punk shows.
This was a big moment for me going to punk shows, coming out of this when I was a child. But there was a lot of Christian punk at the time that was directly dealing with such principalities and powers. So
a young man, Scott Benson. On his shoulders was perched a demon, all talons, all yellow eyes. His name was Punk Rock.
His name was check out that goth chick.
So there's this whole conspiracy that's getting unraveled where a bunch of people, including the previous good pastor, have been thrown out of town.
Right.
Yeah.
All of their stuff is getting bought out from under them.
By Omni.
Turns out that professor lady is a graduate of UCLA. I wonder why that's
I missed
in there.
That. That's funny.
And then of course the handmaiden lady, she used her time in New York, and the angels helped her jump out of a bathroom window to call a guy named Weed on the phone and then jump back in.
Appropriately named.
And this Weed guy was like friends.
This shit is a mess.
There's a whole thing where like Bernice had a sister who died at this college, which is why she lives in this town now.
Suicide.
Of cutting her own throat with like a satanic dagger.
And she was in her underwear at the time.
No, it was not suicide. It was murder. Okay, that's where they come to eventually, is that it was murder.
Yeah.
Because,
I thought it was like demon-assisted murder, right?
It was. It's still murder, though. Still counts.
Oh, right. It's not like suicide. It's not as if there's a demon named suicide.
Like they can't try anyone for it.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's Frank wanting to have his when that popped up, it's a completely superfluous side plot. You could completely eliminate every character from that side plot in it. But I think at one point, Frank got to a point where he's like, why does Bernice care about any of this shit? I have a fundamental motivation problem where I need this extra journo. What do I have them do?
I've been debating how and why to talk about this on the show for a little bit, but this is not new anymore. So, I lost my own sister to suicide a couple months ago. And there's really something about how I've now been noticing how frequent it is for hacks to use suicide as a reason for you to care about a character. It's like you were saying, Scott, where it's like, we need this character to have a motivation. Well, if somebody close to her killed herself, now we care about her. I think it's like a doubly frustrating thing to have that really hacky way out of like, this person has experienced suicide, therefore they have character development, coupled with the fact that in the world of this book, people only kill themselves when they are possessed by a demon that makes them go down that road. And I just have a real problem with that.
And when they've voluntarily given their bodies over to these demons.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just like the demon crept up on them like Reagan in The Exorcist.
Right.
It's just like you had to go to the sissy hypno sessions. And get the evil demon to climb into your head and make you do this for XYZ unnamed reason.
It's just, it is a hack thing because this thing, it feels like it was written by a 7th grader. He's like, well, what's the most dramatic thing that can possibly happen to somebody?
Right.
Well, it's this. And it basically ends up being like a toddler with a handgun, right? It's just like firing off in all directions, not really knowing what the fuck he's even doing.
And this happens again because now we have, it's the pastor who's going out of town to like meet up with people. Like he gets a distressed call and he's talking to some of these people who had left town. And then he goes to this house. The house is full of demons. And again, the demons could have killed him. Like, if you want to make the story scary, the demons could actually have some, like, presence in this world.
By the way, another note about that guy, he was also falsely accused of molestation.
I'm not kidding. It's like half a dozen dudes or something. It's a lot.
More
than 3.
I have expected this to become the Crucible midway through, honestly. It was just, I saw Pastor Bush with Goody Carmen, I guess.
But this one we get the hat trick, right? We get the demons. we get the false molestation accusations, and we get the suicide by gun.
And the false molestation stuff, like this shows up in other Frank Peretti books. This is a bell that he continues to ring. And it's because, well, look at this. Oh, don't pay attention to what is happening right now with the Southern Baptist Convention, for instance.
Right.
It's like, no, there's just a lot of devils out there trying to destroy our churches.
Yeah, well, it's how they bring down men. And that's how, and after feminism now, people listen to this, which is part of the problem that's in this book, is that like the women are essentially getting uppity and getting out from under like the authority of like good, strong men that can kind of keep them on the straight and narrow. And so forth. Other than Edith or whoever the older missionary or lady is, there's not a lot of like matriarchs of God.
Oh, right. Yeah. Edith, who was a missionary to China and was no stranger to spiritual warfare from those Buddhists or whatever.
The Cultural Revolution was just demon central. Yeah.
Mrs. Bush, I don't know how
Her
else
name's
to
Barbara.
say. Barbara Bush. So Mrs. Bush is portrayed as like a good wife because when the Jezebel says, oh, your husband and I have been sleeping together for all this time, they just kind of look at each other, the Bushes, and then they look back at her and they both like nod and go, the power of Christ compels you.
Right.
Like, she is not for 1 second deluded into thinking that her husband could ever do that.
I imagine from the perspective of someone who is a real person who has actually been sexually assaulted by a pastor, imagine bringing that accusation to the fore and then just have everyone start fucking like slamming a Bible against your forehead and screaming at you, demon get out, demon get out. It's not unrealistic.
No,
that is absolutely something that happens.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And it's just not normally portrayed as like heroic like it is in this book.
No, not really.
And to the point of the suicide thing too, that's another thing that traditionally Christian culture, evangelical culture in particular, just doesn't know how to handle.
Absolutely.
It's something that we don't have a vocabulary for in general, but like when I was at the funeral for my sister, every person who came up to me, like I first of all, I hope nobody ever has to experience anything like this. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I pray that it never happens to you if you are listening to this. But I do have a tip for if it does end up happening to you. If somebody walks up to you and says, you know, God has a plan and these things happen. We don't know why, but God has a plan. It's not worth it to like do anything. Just be like, okay, thank you. And that's what I did. But like this fucking shit being part of the plan in all these horrible little devices, like this is the part of the book that made me really, really angry, actually, because it really takes a special kind of piece of shit to like take something that is so, whether we're talking about something like assault or suicide, something that dramatically changes the life of a person forever. To take such a fundamentally ground-shaking thing and just make it a little device for the sake of just adding a little bit of texture to your characters, it's despicable.
I think it's because he does not give these people stories and agency, really. It's simply like everyone in this story, aside from a few people, are essentially just statistics. It's like this person is here to make a moral argument about worst case scenarios. And that's why they jump to it. It's just like that list of things of like I bind the spirit of alcoholism, suicide, teenage pregnancy, like kind of thing. Like it's just one of those things that ends up getting used kind of flippantly. And it's one of those things I remember I had a friend, I was dating a girl who wasn't a Christian in high school. This is a big, huge problem. I was unequally yoked. And,
come on, man.
Sure,
at age 16, it's very important to be yoked equally. But she made some sort of comment of like the weird thing with the Christians is you just talk about like murder and death all the time. Like you're just always talking about torture and execution and stuff. And like just the way that you talk about things is so, there's just so much of that. I'm like, yeah, it's true. Because this is like late 90s. There was so much of a emphasis on like martyrdom, especially within evangelicalism. And this is before Columbine.
I don't really care if they label me a Jesus freak.
Yeah.
What is that song?
It's DC Talk, Jesus Freak.
Yeah. And it's a song that they wrote to accompany a devotional book that they co-wrote with the Voices of the Martyrs. All about different martyrs.
You have solved a 20-year-old mystery for me. Thank you.
And I think there was also, if I recall correctly, a Jesus Freak NIV Bible.
Yes. Oh, I knew a bunch of people with it.
Yeah, and like that was a book that you could get that literally just listed out the story of someone who was martyred and stuff. It was just that, and like up to like modern times. A lot of that's probably completely apocryphal, I'm sure. But, you know, and like they would, and I remember like the book itself had this kind of like rough hewn cover, and like it did that thing with the pages where they left them kind of untrimmed.
Yes,
so you're reading
they don't cut the pages along the end.
This rough sort of smuggled in book.
Oh, it's an edgy book. Yeah.
You're getting the world's boringest stories about martyred Christians.
No, they're super cool stories. That's the thing about martyrdom stories. You keep them nice and fast and they're crisp. And it's like, here's this guy. He was told be bad. And he's like, I'm going to be good. Then they threw him in a fucking brass bowl and set him on fire.
Well, you know
right?
who's not fast and crisp with his writing is Frank Peretti.
It's true.
And I would like to read, this is one sentence. She reached into her bag and brought out a pair of dark sunglasses with which she covered her eyes.
As opposed to what?
Hang on.
It's so good.
She put on her sunglasses.
So you talked about like before we were talking specifically about suicide, about this place that he was going and wandering in, and there were demons, there were false accusations, and like suicide. And that's was that the ex-editor of the paper, I believe?
Yeah,
he
this
was
is
like,
the guy Ted.
He gets like suicided like Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, it is. It's a Jeffrey Epstein situation.
Yes. And then there's like another guy who you think is dead briefly, and all the windows on his house are broken, and they make it clear that windows on both houses are broken differently, where one is like all in and then the other one is all out for some reason.
Also,
Call was coming from inside the house, Brian.
At one point, Susan's car goes over a ravine, and Bernice sees it like fucking crash in this ravine, and she somehow survives. I don't know how.
Bernice doesn't even see it. The demons see it, and they're like, "Oh, she's dead." Yeah. Let me explain this, because AJ asked about it, so I paid a lot of attention to it when I got to that passage.
I was also a bit confused.
And also, Weed dies, you think, in a truck because he gets a Rufo slapped into his beer, and it falls off of a bridge. Both of these incidents happen like in a row, and you're like, why did we just have two characters die the exact same way?
Also, this part of the book, I will say, feels very much like Alan Wake, insofar as there's a lot of like being in the forest, running and driving around, and nothing makes any sense.
This is why Frank Peretti in the future is just like, oh yeah, everything's set in Washington and Idaho, because like it should be, because it gets more specific that way.
This is the part of the book you could have excised almost all of this.
Yes.
It becomes very hard to follow. And look, am I glad that after playing Alan Wake, we got to read its novelization in the form of this present darkness? Yeah, sure, I guess.
I'm Alan Wake. I'm a young pastor in a Norman Rockwell-esque town. Today, the demons are coming for us.
Anyway, so these vehicles, they both crash. You see one van fall off of a mountain after we saw this lady like pack up a suitcase and escape the cult. And there's also like a small Hindu that is bothering her, who is described as, quote, well, you know, he was like a guru or a witch doctor or some kind of far out ooga booga man.
Oh,
I remember
to see it.
Yeah.
The tiniest Hindu boy.
That character is not written to be like, that's not written to be also an example of, well, this is what an idiot would say. It's like this is what a rational person would say.
I was listening to this without headphones on, and then that line happened, and I had to put headphones on.
This is a character from the middle of like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, right? And it's like, it's not good. Both of these vehicles have fallen to their deaths. The demons celebrate that they're dead.
The vehicles have fallen to their
deaths.
Because that's all that happened. Also, we've had moments where like demons like pull out the transmission and then angels plug them back in just in time to avoid like
you're referencing so much more closely than me.
I read the whole thing. I really read it.
But like I wasn't really reading it. You know what I mean?
I know. I'm in so much pain, like physical pain.
Utterly, like actually, demons unplugging a transmission and angels plugging it back in is about, that's like the level of just bullshit people get up to in this. Like that's it's that kind of thing where you're like, okay, well, there's a bunch of angels and demons. There's these like monsters running around and guys who they fight with swords because technology has just never like they're Amish or something. They just stopped at like the Bronze Age or something, and and stuff, and like all this stuff you could do with it, and they mostly just hang around, and then they do little mundane things like this, like the Amy Grant song "Angels" or whatever. Like it is that kind of thing where it's like it's fucking guidepost shit. It's like it's Lord of the Rings soundtrack set, but it's guidepost like actual shit that they do.
It's like, oh, we met a man. He gave us $5 and then he was gone.
Yeah, like
and
well,
this
that
is what
happens
happens.
too.
So no one is in the van. The van that falls off of the mountain that was driving super fast, and the angels were like pushing it to make it go faster.
Yeah.
While the demons were pushing the jeeps behind it to make them go faster.
This is real,
the demons were all like,
listeners, this is
"Yay,
real. This is
she's
not
dead."
a joke.
She left on foot. No one was driving the van. An angel was driving the van. And then you find out with Weed, and this also happens at the same time. They both get discovered at the same time. With Weed, he had gotten drugged at the bar, the bar for loggers.
I did catch that,
had shuffleboard. People played shuffleboard at the dive bar for loggers all the time. And so he gets drugged, and he's like, oh, fuck. He was like, I was so stoned, man.
But then it was like
and
a different guy.
He goes to a gas station. It's like a Hitman thing where you throw the emetic grenade and they're like, oh, and they like pause to figure out where the nearest toilet is, and then they go over there. Yeah. And he goes in there, and then, I don't know, Agent 47 hits him with the crowbar, and he's lying on the floor, and then an angel comes out of the bathroom, drives the truck, and crashes it off the bridge.
I thought it was just
to crash
a guy who did
when
that.
I read it, I
says,
thought this was
my
just
car
a
got
guy.
stolen, but then we have
mess.
Bernice, who was like, oh yeah, this angel who's a lesbian with a motorcycle gave me some milk and a sandwich and then disappeared.
Wait.
You guys must have also had angels who could also have been lesbians. We don't know.
The milk and
Drive your
sandwich
vehicles.
lesbian did not show up in the abridged version.
AJ, is this all making more sense now?
Are you telling me that Frank Peretti just adapted Jesus Take the Wheel into novel form?
Yes. Essentially.
Not only did an angel carjack someone, and not only was it very important to the plot, it happened twice.
Twice. In a row. At the same time, too. It was just like
angels could do other things.
Again, I feel like if there had been an editor.
And there's like this greasy kid who hangs out at the arcade, and then he gets exorcised of his demons, even though it's clear he was just like strung out on heroin. And then there's another greasy kid who beat up a lady, and then he gets his demons exorcised. But his demons were like, I don't know if you caught this, but like when they're exorcising his demons, they're like, what's your name? And he's like, fortune telling.
Yeah, no, I remember fortune telling.
What did that have to do with fortune telling?
I feel like this is what Brian is going to say when he's being escorted back to his bed at an old folks home. Just like, it's okay, Mr. Alford. Let's get you to bed. His name was fortune teller.
By the way, you might think that the stuff we just talked about is like coming close to the book wrapping up. It's not.
There are hundreds of pages
No, that's
left.
like
this is the big slog.
That's
of
before the last third.
This is like about the 2/3 point of the book. So
it's funny because this is the slog, but it's the most eventful part of the book too.
But
like there's
in a
so many
boring
things
way.
that happen.
Right.
Yeah,
It's this
and
happens,
it makes it
then
just
this happens,
suck
and this
worse.
happens.
This was the part that I stalled out. I could not get through it, and I switched to audio book, and then that was too long, and I switched to the abridged version. So yeah.
Yes.
So let's wrap up a few more dangling plot threads and get to the conclusion here.
For the love of God.
Please. This is kind of like Heart Condition, where we just had such a hard time getting through it.
No, but it's good. This is a journey. We're on a journey together.
I want to read one more, again, a tiny quote.
Yes.
It's in the high school, too. The kids are messing around with satanic stuff like you wouldn't believe. We used to trip out on drugs. Now it's demons. This is what Frank Peretti actually believes.
Absolutely.
That'll be flashing on the screen throughout
so
this
good.
entire podcast recording.
So Susan, again, she being the like number 2 to the big bad, she gets found out. They find out that she's doing espionage to the big plan, and she seems to die, but like we just heard, she doesn't actually die.
Yeah.
Then Marshall goes home, the newspaper editor goes home, and is confronted by his daughter. And his daughter at this point...
Yeah, his daughter has had this like yogi, I guess, like teaching her the ways of the new age this whole time, because she got into a fight with her dad at the beginning, and she's like, oh, my dad's so difficult. And he's like, what if you hung out with me? And she's like, okay.
Yeah, well, it's also...
That's it.
It's what I do appreciate, actually, this is like the one credit I'll give the book, is that Marshall at least does take some credit for wrongdoing in their relationship. He does say that he fucked up in a way that I feel like a lot of conservative media will be like, well, the kids are the crazy ones and they'll come around eventually. But like he actually owns up that he kind of sucks as a dad.
This kind of faulty dude is the favorite type of faulty guy of this because they, at the beginning, they listed out that's like, well, they fight because they're just so much alike and stuff. So
oh, sure.
She's the equivalent degree of wrong. about stuff. It's just that they're too alike and stuff. And like he does end up going like, I shortchanged them by working too hard. Essentially, there's some cats in the cradle shit by the end. That's his primary sin is not spending enough time and getting back to the basics with the family kind of thing. And like, so he's that kind of guy of like an easy to repent of sin that just is like, spend more time with your kids. How about you throw the softball around on a Saturday morning?
and it would be more interesting to make a book where he actually caused some real problems.
Right.
Yeah. Like he's actually a bad dude because he ends up being in need of repentance anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then you just show how big the love of Christ really is, even like, on a real bad guy.
Instead, what happens here is that his daughter accuses him of raping her. This is like the fourth or fifth false rape allegation at this point.
Yep. And it's so again, this was something that happened in the 80s with all the satanic panic stuff with the McMartin preschool. But again, what was happening in those cases or in the like memory regression thing, it always involved small children or adults who were being put under hypnosis and thinking about things that happened when they were small children.
Right.
This is all 20-year-old women, 23-year-old women,
and the
accusations who are all just manipulating.
Are being made against Christians and not against a satanic cabal, which is what mostly that was used for, at least a lot of the time. That again, I believe Peretti probably would have been like, "Holy shit, that's legit, guys."
But the big thing that this pulls us through to, though, is now we know that Sandy is totally in it, right? She's totally taken over by the demons. And
she has a demon like head crab.
She's demon-pilled at this point.
She's based in demon-pilled. And where this whole fucking thing ends up after a whole lot more plot, including Hank and Marshall meeting up in jail for some reason.
Yeah, it has to be said that the Wikipedia plot synopsis skips like 20 chapters in between and just goes straight to, they meet in jail and figure out, there are two sides to this war.
That's kind of the turning point. Like that's supposed to be the big aha moment where like, because like Hank gets thrown in jail because Hank gets arrested and stuff, and then like Marshall gets arrested and they're in jail, and like that he kind of tries to do a sort of fake out of like the Hank was in jail, then like another guy came in who had like a head injury or something, and he sits down and it was like, then Marshall said, you're supposed to be like, holy shit guys, it's the two parts of the story. Like the whole time everyone's like, just wait, these two are going to be really important. Oh shit, here they are in the same.
They're going to play off each other so well. There's going to be such character chemistry.
And then basically no, but
Well, we have my favorite thing, which is when Marshall discovers he's not really a Christian. My favorite thing is the Christian who hasn't been a Christian this whole time.
And this is a trope in Christian literature. This happens in Left Behind. Well, I mean, it's the whole point of Left Behind.
It's the pastor in Left Behind. It's like it's this guy who has lived all of his life. He's going to church. He believes in Jesus. He believes in God, but somehow not really.
This is a Sunday Christian, folks.
So then he prays the prayer. He turns his life over to Christ, while we also have all the God warriors in the parking lot. Saying this is dark-sided.
Dark-sided.
She's not a Christian.
I should point out, by this point, there's a convoy of Christians just rolling around praying very loudly outside of places.
This is like the Freedom Convoy of the truckers.
The Queen of Canada shows up. It's
This like cloud of demons has come into town, and the day starts, and it's like it was a usual Sunday, except cars didn't start right, and the lawnmowers kept giving out. So it's like Frank Peretti's version of the actual fucking demonic apocalypse coming to town is just that song in the Fantastics where everyone wakes up a little too early.
This plum is too ripe.
Sorry. Please don't watch me while I'm eating.
Sorry.
You're about to drown that magnolia. Sorry. You're standing in my kumquat. Sorry.
For those who love the Fantastics.
Yeah, who's that for? I mean, it's for me.
It's the one good song in the score is what it is.
You're so fucking wrong. Holy shit.
So wrong.
Whoa. Is there another good song in the Fantastics?
Yeah,
Tell me
the
what it
songs
is.
that
All the songs
I sang
are great.
in high school.
Oh, fuck you both.
Fuck
they are
you,
terrible.
bitch.
I like the Fantastics.
You're going to defend the... I can't believe I'm on a podcast with two Fantastics defenders.
Listen.
Defenders of Tom Jones, but not that Tom Jones, the different one.
Speaking as someone who won the Outstanding Acting Award in the Michigan State Theater One Act Festival for my portrayal of Bellamy, I'm going to defend the Fantastics because that is A, the most important prize I've ever won, and B, everything since then has been one long emotional letdown for me. So fuck you.
Yes.
And I will defend the Fantastics as much as I like on this show.
I will defend the Fantastics up to a certain point, but it depends on what you pay.
You have demons on your shoulders. Their names are dilly-dallying and lost productivity.
What's funny is that like so much of what the demons and angels get up to is like swaying mundane little votes and stuff.
Yeah.
So your award was actually, the product. You didn't see the spiritual warfare behind you getting that award.
Yeah, we only really get to the action at the very end. That's the first time we actually truly see them fight.
If there's one thing that Frank Peretti learned from Sissy Hypno, it was edging. So...
Because everything builds to this big battle. Sandy is going to get initiated into the organization, by which I mean she is going to get possessed by a demon named Madeline who will kill her.
Yeah, Madeline, who was also this is like a trans demon.
By this point, I was basically dissociating. But two big battles going on here. One on the physical plane, the other on the spiritual plane.
The stakes could not be...
more confusing.
The actual stakes at this point are a college might get bought by a company,
right?
Yes,
and then they're going to make the kids all one by one get enslaved and top themselves because of demons.
Exactly,
and that is apparently what they're going to do everywhere in their quest to ...
Hard to say.
Make everyone Buddhist.
Just induce a MacGuffin. Just have God's giant cock at the center of town, and all the demons are trying to defeat.
This is what happens when you bring a Catholic into this. You start having relics.
Right? Yes, that's true. That's true.
If you just want to kill kids, there are simpler and less expensive ways to do that, probably.
But so eventually what happens is the feds, I guess, find out that inside this building there's
there is a series of phone calls that all happen at once.
We get this sentence, which I love with regard to the feds going into the building where Sandy is being given Sissy Hypno. And I quote, "The VIPs ran into the building with serious business in their eyes and guns in their hands."
And also, this town has been taken over by police from another town over.
Right.
Yeah.
For some reason,
it gets so convoluted.
And then the cult leader who also runs the Shell Corporation that's buying everything, he has possessed himself with the big boy or whatever his name is.
Strongman, yes.
Strongman, yeah.
Scott, you were going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, so one of the funny things about this is, I didn't want to pass this, is how these feds get there is, so there's this whole thing of who's got the files that prove the financials, who's got the that is a large driver.
Yeah, there's your MacGuffin. It's the fucking files or whatever.
The files show something, and they take it to another accountant, and the other accountant says, okay, cool, I figured this out, and then someone's like, okay, well, I'll call my one friend at the New York Times, and then you call your friend, and he knows the attorney general, and then this guy, and then call the FBI. Just call the FBI. Let's just call the FBI guys.
Yeah.
And then, and so when literally at one point when Bernice sort of drops the hammer on Alf and is like, "You're fucked, man. I called," and it's I called the police and the FBI and the feds and the attorney general. It's listing off, and at one point, when
and all in 10 minutes.
Yeah, when
they were all one call after the next.
When the prayer hammers start, when the other shoe of the prayer starts dropping at the end, right after Marshall and Hank meet in the cell, it's Bernice by a phone, and it's just one call after another of "Hello, ma'am, this is the FBI. Is there a problem?" And she goes, "Yeah, you got to get to the college." And it's ring, ring. "Hi, this is the attorney general. I heard some weird shit's going. Oh my God, can you go to the college by 2 p.m.? And then literally it just keeps happening over and over again. And that is guidepost ass thing to happen because you can't just be like a bunch of things
the
happen.
angels make the calls happen.
Immediately afterwards, right after that, this happened. And then right after that, this happened. Because that's how you tell the story to say, oh, God lined it up in this
there's
really
even a kicker line in there where I think it's Bernice who's like, well, looks like God really is showing up today or something weird like that.
I never thought I'd see a miracle.
They also need to make the calls that fast because they know all the calls are being tracked.
Right.
But then they go to Alf Brummel's office and he hasn't been listening to the calls.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's so bizarre. It's just the fact that, like, yes, the entire government will show up for this small town college fiscal misappropriation issue.
Yeah, then, like, Lucius turns against Rafar, which means that, like, the demons are more in disarray because now everything is like the angels are focused and the demons are against each other. There's like a coup. And then the old lady finds out what Rafar's name is because God gives her a vision that almost kills her in the parking lot. And then she's like, we gotta pray. We bind you, Rafar.
Yeah, let's read this real quick.
Yeah, this was the actual part of the book. Like of everything that happened in the book, this bit right here was the most, okay, you're just half-assing it at this point. Like there's no, you could have set this up somehow, but no.
Yeah, as someone who's like raced to the end of a first draft before, I can recognize when someone's not giving it their all. And this is the most, God, I don't fucking know. It gets a vision from God.
It's hard to call anything in this book a Deus Ex Machina because the entire thing is just Deus everywhere.
That's the thing is, it's like God is supposed to be in the machine, but stuff keeps coming from outside.
Yeah.
It's like, why do you need feds when you have the Lord?
Edith started to weep.
There's still an evil spirit out there,
she cried.
He's doing great mischief. His name is, Raphael. Raving.
Bobby Corsi spoke up.
Rafar!
Edith looked at him with wide eyes.
Yes, that's the name the Lord's impressing on me.
Rafar!
Bobby said again.
He's the big wheel!
Did we jump? So we jump forward a little here.
Yeah, exactly. A little.
Tal could only back away from the fearsome onslaught of the demon prince, his once good hand still holding his sword up for defense. Rafar kept swinging and slashing, the sparks flying from the blades as they met. Tal's arms sank lower with each blow.
The Lord rebuke you!
Tal found the breath to say again. And then another dot, and we're back. Edith Duster was on her feet and ready to shout it to the heavens.
Rafar, you wicked prince of evil, in the name of Jesus, we rebuke you!
We jump again. Rafar's blade zinged over Tal's head. It missed.
All together now.
We bind you! Shouted the remnant. The big yellow eyes winced. We cast you out, Andy said. There was a puff of sulfur and Rafar bent down. Tal leaped to his feet.
We will rebuke you, Rafar!
Rafar screamed. Tal's blade had torn him open.
Yes, there's single combat between Rafar. I don't know why we even have the strong man because Rafar has been the guy the whole time.
We also have the general, who, by the way, has not come
comes
up yet.
The general.
Yeah, not the general from the commercials, but there's a thing where like that strong man and general are like, you know, positions essentially, and like the strong man is sort of like the general of demons, and so like only the masters of them get to know their names. Which I was like, okay, you're getting into some interesting lore here about like knowledge spreading and like whose true names are what. And I was like, literally, by the way, that whole thing of like strongman is a position and no one knows the actual demon's name because of that.
Yeah.
One interesting bit of lore in this entire thing, because that's not in the Bible or anything. That's just something that Frank just whipped out. And I was like, that's actually interesting because it's like, oh, cool. This is like, there's actually something unknown in this entire book.
Sure.
I don't know this guy's name, but then they also have the general on the angel side. And I'm like, why don't we get his, like, what is it, like General Steve or something? Like, why don't we know who this is? And the general's not really a character up until the very end of it. He just shows up as their sort of OP guy, and he takes on the strong man, who is the most powerful guy in it. And then there's kind of the second in command sort of.
I mean, the strongman just gets owned. Like, that's all that happens to him.
Just straight up.
Like slobbering in a conference room.
It's strange.
We should probably talk about how he gets owned, because this is preposterous. All this is absolutely ridiculous.
I just read it this morning, and I don't know what to tell you. It's just he gets prayed at, and it's just like you have 3 prayer warriors, including like the pastor and the editor, walk into the room, and each of them have 2 burly dudes with them, and then they just go to town.
Yeah.
Go to town on him. And while that's happening, because he's voluntarily possessed the cult leader dude. He's like, his eyes are popping out. He's like growing fangs and he's slobbering all over the table. He's just like, you'll never defeat me. And then all of his lawyers are like, can we strike that from the record?
Yeah, this is very 80s in the sense that they kind of keep bringing up lawyers as like evil and funny.
Yeah,
kind of thing. It's like oh, then there was a lawyer there, and you know how those guys are.
The game was won 6 chapters earlier, and now it's all just happening.
We're kind of getting it's all the other shoes dropping at once, and they are terrible shoes.
And then that evil psychology woman, Langstrat, she gets shot by the police chief because their demons are fighting.
Bang!
Yeah, he literally just shoots her. I was just like, oh wow, okay, you're right, that would solve this. I guess
there's
you
guns
could just
in this
shoot
world.
all these bad people, I guess.
And everything, it closes out with the angels having defeated the demons.
All the relationships get mended.
Everything's mended. It's happy.
Yeah, the town is in revival now.
Intel smiled along. He smiles a long smile and he says, "Let's be off." And then he flies away
to Brazil.
Yeah,
they're going to Brazil.
That's the sort of like, this is again the cinematic thing, or like I read a bunch of adventure stories thing of the like, okay, we finished it, and now someone goes, yeah, but if you're ready for the real adventure, let's go off to whatever. It's the end of Lord of the Rings, let's hunt some orc line kind of thing. That kind of thing where he's like, going off to Brazil, the revival's going well there, but blah, blah, blah. You ready for a real mission? And Tal's like, fuck yeah, man.
Yeah.
And we were just like,
I listened to it at double speed, and let me tell you something. If you're listening to this at double speed, all the repetitions of Peretti start to sound like popcorn popping.
Yes, I did the same thing.
So I've read a couple of other Frank Peretti books. They're much better written than this. The story still always kind of falls apart, but the prose is higher quality.
Sure.
I read part of The Oath. The Oath is about, Scott, you'd like this. It's about a small mining town up in the mountains that has a deep evil lurking within it. Because
I ripped this off for Night Lords.
In the early 19th century, they signed a charter that said that they had to kill every Christian who ever wanted to move in.
Oh,
just like Possum Springs.
That is such a stupid plot. That is just so unbelievably stupid that you could make a good story out of that. But you would have to write it in a way where it's like, this is sort of like a folkloric weird thing. Like you would have to be really non-literal and poetic about it or something. Like you can make like a Nick Cave song out of this or something. It would rule. But if you're writing in this sort of style that Peretti does, at least in my experience with him, where he tries to do that sort of like, there's some mundane reality that all this spirituality is like suffusing. Like there's some actual, like at one point, average guy Steve is going to be there or something. This is like, that's the kind of story where you need no one to be a recognizable human at all to make it work. Yeah.
And then he wrote, another one that I read was called Monster, which is about a couple people who get ripped apart by some big beasts in the woods, and then someone hangs out with Sasquatches for most of the book. But it turns out the beasts that killed the guy were actually chimpanzees that were being stitched together by a mad evolutionary scientist to show that evolution doesn't work.
Did the Sasquatches, did they come to Jesus?
No, the Sasquatches are good though, and they are all like the woman who hangs out with them.
They're good and they're my friends.
Names them Jacob, Leah, and Rachel because they're also poly. And
I'm so sorry. I'm just picturing the Sasquatches with big old crucifixes around their necks, just going.
Well, it's like the Calvin praying bumper sticker, but he's a Sasquatch or something. Yeah, but he's got a football. He's doing the Tim Tebow knee kneeling thing or whatever.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. And I read House, which has nothing to do with the classic Japanese film. It's about some people who end up in a house in Alabama, which is run by a bunch of inbred demons. And
inbred
one lady.
Demons?
Yeah. They're described as inbreds the whole time, and then it turns out that they're demons, and they're punishing everyone, and they pick them off one by one for their sins. And the last lady left standing is a woman who acknowledges that she's a big old slut, and then finally turns her life to Jesus.
How are demons reproducing in this?
Very carefully.
Yeah, there you go. Because the whole one of my issues with this book and in actually this entire thing, because there was a lot of media that was like, okay, kids, this sort of unlocked within Christian media. Okay, we can do fantasy now. We can do action now. We can do superheroes now because of and we can do this sort of like horror fiction type thing because we just make it all spiritual warfare. But because of the cosmology of the world, one, it never makes any sense at all. And some of us leave the church for this reason. But the stakes are really, 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 really vague. Like in the sense of like everything is, so you end up getting those. And I don't know, I'm sure there's an actual term for this. I never came up with one. But around this time, let's say 70s, 80s into the 90s, there's this huge focus on all of these societal problems, be it like adultery or like drugs or suicide or all these other things, like that they can frame as both an individual choice, but also like we're in the era of this kind of thing. This is like evidence of a fallen world sort of deal. As being individual battles, huge conflicts or something. Like there's that thing of like the guy like shooting up but he's shooting into like Jesus's arm or something. And it's like everything is like, like that's like a really personal version of it, but it's like and there's like Christian music songs that are like, does he still feel the nails every time I fail and stuff, where it's like okay, you have now elevated your personal mundane bullshit to just operatic levels.
I think what's interesting about it too is that, like it is something that lives in the realm of the personal for these people in terms of how it is addressed through media and so on.
Right.
Sure.
But it is not in the realm of the personal when it comes to how laws are made.
Right.
Like it is this weird disjunct between, because this would be a funny thing maybe to read and laugh at if it was just like, this is sort of a quaint little thing and ultimately it doesn't really mean much. But especially in some of Peretti's later work, like there's a book Prophet, for instance, which is all about like the abortionists and how they are ruining everything for everyone. And, like we were saying too, Piercing the Darkness is sort of like an ACLU stand-in, is the main antagonist there.
I think it's literally the ACLU.
Oh, it might be the ACLU.
Yeah.
But the point is, these people are not content to just have this be an issue of personal successes or failings. It is part of a broader culture war.
Right.
And this sort of thing laid the groundwork that gave people the vocabulary and the framing to push for these laws over the course of the next few decades.
Right. And I think that it does important work. And again, it wasn't the only thing, but this was the big, like this was like the boom that like wasn't, you didn't have to go to particular meetings of stuff. You could just read this book, but it was a way of taking stuff that I think a lot of Christians were embarrassed by, this sort of like revival tent rant, like ravings and stuff. And bring it into, no, these are respectable men. And and a few women,
and a woman,
and a woman, and increasingly women, who they're in a town just like you, and all their struggles about what is being taught in classes, like what is who is the pastor of this church, and like is he too liberal, and does he like want to save the whales too much, etc. And like it takes that from the kind of fire and brimstone thing and makes it something that now it's like, no, these are essentially the troops. And you're helping the troops and stuff in the same way that during that kind of late Cold War thing, it's like, well, the Russians are going to invade. Like we're all going to have to like be like ready for this and kind of thing. It has a very Cold War mentality to it of like we're constantly in this simmering conflict and they could invade at any time, but the good guys are here, but we all need to be ready to kind of do our part. And we are all like prayer warriors and that kind of thing. So when you are like, I really want that promotion at work, but that other guy got it for some reason. Now that takes on the realm of the spiritual. That is a massive fantasy thing. Or when like, there's Mitt Romney is up for vote, to go back to Michael W. Smith, there's something that's not just, he's a milquetoast, shitty Republican Mormon guy. It's this is a battle for the souls of all man. This could be the first domino to fall, just like Ashton kind of thing. And and that's the thing. It brilliantly, I mean, that's the one thing it does. That's brilliant, is that it does a really good job of taking stuff that Christians would be very ashamed to just admit that they believe in and make it part of yuppie life in the 80s, essentially.
And it's no coincidence either that this stuff finds its apotheosis in the Trump administration. The fact that they were able to then take all of that stuff and say, here's the justices. We got to get him in office to, uphold these laws. Trump's our guy. He was ordained by God. He might not be the perfect messenger, but he's going to fucking make it happen.
Right. That takeover of a lot of Christian stuff, Christian culture, by this more fired up average Joes, they kind of with this everything is the apocalypse. Everything is apocalyptic. You know, even something small, that's the first stop or the last possible stop before the apocalypse hits. That, like, if you look at even like the anti-abortion movement, you know, it's very Catholic, very intellectual. The only way that they really get it over the edge is they figure out how to bring essentially this sort of very reactionary apocalyptic evangelicals on. And they're the ones who are just so fucking fired up all the goddamn time that because everything is a life or death thing, everything is like apocalyptic, that they'll go, they just do not give a fuck. And that becomes like the voice of, you know, moral majority type thing. Well, so what was interesting to me about it, other than like looking at just all the people I've known since that were so influenced by this theology and the interest of how it mainstreams a lot of stuff that would have been seen as embarrassing by your more like, you know, buttoned up kind of Christians. Because this wasn't just popular with like Pentecostals. It was popular with fairly milquetoast mainline people who took it as essentially metaphor, sort of, but it means the same basic
and you can see
thing.
ways that like Peretti gets vague with like liturgy or even the prayers. He just usually just says, oh, and they prayed.
And
the same way that he says,
you
oh,
can
and they
insert
cussed,
whatever you want. Yeah.
We're in such a weird, shitty, awful time at that point in culture. And you have this rising, hyper reactionary, it matches the sort of new agey thing of like, we're bringing all this like big, huge spiritual whatever into your just dumbass suburban life and saying like, oh yeah, like you getting this job or not getting this job is like because of energy and manifesting and all this other stuff. Like we're going to make everything cosmic. He's just matching that. And like, I think that it suits a lot of the same needs in that sense of like, you are probably a white person who bought this book and you are looking for why your life is more dramatic than it feels like. Your dumb little struggles that you go through. You can't just take solace in the fact that you're human and that this means something or that you relate to other people or you're feeling this or anything. No, it has to be connected to the spiritual realm. Huge powers need to be contending for this all the time. Fucking vote for Reagan, that kind of thing. Your small business. Do you want it to get shut down and taken over by immigrants and lesbians and stuff? Like it's that kind of thing. And that's what I think is sort of brilliant about it is that it takes all of the conflicts in this are so small, but it links every really awful thing that does happen to people into this tiny little conflict over what are the kids learning in school now? I bet it's shit that makes them mad at me at Christmas when they come home. Kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. They're being brainwashed, right?
Yeah. It's that moment where this is happening, that post-60s meltdown. But when Reagan has already come in, so now there's like a growing sense of we are the growing establishment power kind of thing. We're no longer just freaking out. We're going to we're going to exert our power kind of thing.
Well, and it's interesting to go back to that quote from the publisher then, right? That, you know, there's 35 or 40 million people in this country who are really upset with the way things are in 1989. And for once, their side is not beaten down. They win. When they have been winning and winning and winning and winning, they feel even more aggrieved as their victories keep coming. And we're seeing that today.
Still true now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Theologically, you cannot win in this. Like you can fight and you can win battles, but you can never be in a winning position and have this theology make sense.
So the battle has to keep going on. There have to constantly be demons that you have to pray away, that you have to fight, because the whole thing falls apart the minute there's peace. Ever.
Yeah. So take your kid, do deliverance on them and cast them out because they said a curse word or something.
There we go.
Like,
So Scott, is there anything specifically that you wanted to pitch or anything like that as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I have something to pitch to you. A little guy named Jesus. All
right. Oh, wow.
If you just, with every head bowed and every eye closed.
Oh, God.
No.
Wow, you got a folding chair that you've turned around?
Yeah, that's great.
You're straddling
a cap backwards?
I need an acoustic guitar with like light reverb to start strumming silently in the background and stuff. And then someone's going to raise their hand. No, I don't have anything to pitch, but watch this space for something.
Sick.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's great. Isn't that that's an amazing like tease of like something.
Something big is coming soon.
So one of the interesting things about the antagonist in this present darkness, that being the global New Age movement, is that so much of it finds its roots in the early 19th century Great Awakening. Spiritualism comes out of the exact same conditions that brought us the explosion in evangelicalism, in Adventism, in Mormonism. It's all the same stuff. Even though as it diverges, as it ventures around throughout the late 19th century into the 20th century, it becomes more strange, more foreign, more Asian. And now we see with QAnon, these things are merging back together. There is a huge contingent of new agey people who believe in this same stuff for the same reason as the evangelical people. Because of cosmologies like this that show they really believe the same things, just on different sides.
Right. It serves the same dramatic needs.
Peretti shows so many times these demons that appear exactly the same as angels. And yet he still wants you to buy his angels.
Yeah.
Don't buy the angels.
Don't buy the angels, kid.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
I'm a pretty half decent Scot for my area in the region.
Probably the best Scot in the greater Pittsburgh region.
Yeah, like when it comes to similar to the Angels and Demons,
it's a great Scot.
We have territorial Scots and stuff, and I'm the actual fifth best Scot in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Well, there we go.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
All right, folks, that's it for this one. If you're not already, you can go ahead and follow Scott over on Twitter and Instagram at BombsFall. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Spox_Brian. If you want to follow Josh, he's at BoschJ. If you want to follow AJ, he's at The Fuzzy Mask. And if you want to follow the worst of all possible worlds, that's at TWOAPW, the first letter of each word. Now, this show is not brought to you by product sponsorships. We don't intend for it to be brought to you by product sponsorships. We are brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/worstofall. And if you sign up over there, you can get access to our entire backlog of premium episodes. Plus, if you sign up at the $10 tier, you can get access to our new monthly Lads Cast, where we just shoot the shit off the cuff, talk about things that are going on in our lives. Again, that is patreon.com/worstofall. Our music is by Brendan Dalton, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe.